Chapter 301. Simon, Rolling, Ackerman. Come on, Gilbert, you're the last one left. Charles called, his eyes settling on his youngest son, who had been waiting patiently as everyone else made their choice. Kakarot stepped back, clearing the way. Go ahead, pick whichever fruit you want, Charles encouraged him. Gilbert's gaze swept over the row of devil fruits. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and plucked one from the display. Dad, I'll take this obsidian fruit, he declared, holding up the dark, crystalline orb. Charles nodded with approval. Excellent choice. The obsidian fruit hardens your body to a level comparable with diamonds. At your strongest, you might even rival Diamond Joe's himself. All right, eat up, Charles said, giving Gilbert the green light. Gilbert brought the fruit to his lips and swallowed. Instantly, a surge of power coursed through him. Black crystals sprouted across his skin, clicking together until his entire body was sheathed in a smooth obsidian armor. Charles reached out and tapped his son's shoulder. The surface was as unyielding as stone, an impervious shell that even the finest swordsman would struggle to slice through. He couldn't suppress a proud smile. Not bad at all. This is going to suit you perfectly. In the future, you can go toe-to-toe with the Diamond Boy aboard the Whitebeard pirate ship and see who's really the tougher fighter. Charles tapped his father, Gabita's broad chest, and grinned. Dad, I promise I'll make you proud. Gabita threw back his head and laughed. That's exactly what I want to hear, son. I'll be waiting for that day. With that, their small harvest of magical fruits had been distributed, and the easy days were over. From now on, Charles and his siblings would begin a rigorous training regimen, closing the chapter on their 5 or 6 years of carefree childhood. Charles himself had designed the drills, drawing on vivid memories of military training from his past life and a fierce drive to push the human body beyond its limits. He wasn't worried about the risk of injury. This world held wonders beyond anyone's imagination, and every step forward, however small, was a victory. Thanks to their extraordinary physiques, gifts from Gabetta, and a dash of Charles's own hidden talent, the family's eldest son and daughter had already shown prodigious potential. With their combined strength and unbreakable determination, these young warriors were destined to become legends in their own right. If you want to rise quickly in this world, there's only one way. Fight, fight, and keep fighting. Training alone won't forge real strength. That truth is born in the crucible of battle. Just ask Estes and Caesar. Estes was only 8 years old when he first set foot on the front line alongside Barrett, dodging bullets and charging headlong into chaos. Caesar's journey was scarcely gentler. He not only stood against pirates on his own, but also endured daily beatings from Charles. Those relentless blows tempered his body more rapidly than Estes's years of drills ever could. Combine that with the power of the Green Dragon Devil Fruit, and Caesar has outstripped even Estes in raw capability. Today, Caesar leans on his Devil Fruit abilities to dispatch most opponents, and he'd still have no trouble holding his own in a straight-up brawl with an ordinary lieutenant general. That said, someone like Vice Admiral Carp would still floor him with a single punch. It's also worth remembering that the previous lieutenant general, Darren, was old, frail, and hardly a warrior. He wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes against a well-trained colonel. In hindsight, recruiting Caesar, bruised and battered though he was, turned out to be an incredible bargain. Ghost Spider's abilities, honed at the elite training camp, place him squarely in the league of brigadier generals or even major generals. Were it not for a shortfall in merit credits, he'd already qualify as a colonel. He now stands toe-to-toe with Estes, and their duel has drawn the Navy's full attention. None of this surprises Charles. After all, striking out to sea as a pirate always brings rewards. Anyone who joins his crew inherits not only his respect but also his name. Once a pirate, always a pirate. That stain can never be scrubbed away. At times, Charles wonders if he's done his crew a disservice by binding them to this life, forcing them to carry the pirate's banner from the moment they sign aboard, the same mark he bears. But dwelling on regrets is pointless. Fate has its own currents. Charles never intended to become a pirate. He tumbled into it almost by accident, and now he's one of the fiercest captains on the high seas. In a world ruled by raw power, strength is everything. Titles don't matter, only the force behind them. Charles stood on the deck as the last of the fruit pouches were handed out to the children. The harbor of Beihai faded behind them, and the ship set its course for the West Sea. To reach it, they would have to pass through the upside-down mountains, a towering range on the Red Earth continent where the four great seas converge and where every sailing vessel entering the Grand Line must navigate its treacherous currents. 10 days into their voyage, Charles awoke before dawn, drawn by the ship's growing tremors. He rushed to the bow and gasped. There, looming against the pale sky, was the upside-down mountain. Its cliffs soared so high that their peaks vanished into the mist. Below, the water surged upward in a roaring cascade, defying gravity as it reversed direction and raced toward the sky. "Is that really the upside-down mountain?" one of the younger children whispered, eyes wide. "The water, it's flowing backward." Several more children pressed forward for a better view. Reaction was instant. "Careful, don't lean too far over," Irina called out, her voice firm yet gentle. She hurried to the prow, gathering the little ones and pulling them back from the rail. Elena hovered nearby, ready to catch any straggler or calm a frightened child. Trunks, his curls brushing the top of his eyes, tugged at Elena's sleeve. "Aunt Irina, are we going up there?" he asked, nodding toward the reverse waterfall. Elena glanced at Charles, who offered her an encouraging nod. Smiling at Trunks, she said, "Yes, we're going right through it. I promise it'll be an adventure." Charles watched the crew prepare for the approach. Ropes were secured, sails trimmed, and every sailor braced for the violent currents ahead. Beyond the awe-inspiring sight, they all knew the real challenge lay in surviving the ascent of Upside-Down Mountain, and in doing so, earning safe passage into the mysterious West Sea. "We're docking soon, so cut the antics. It's dangerous," Elena called, ruffling Trunks' hair as she shepherded the children below deck. 2 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Charles's eldest son was now 3 years old, and the Rockefeller household had grown by 3 more, the 12th son, Simon, the 9th daughter, Rolling, and the 13th son, Ackerman. Rolling was the daughter of Lady Tianyu, whom Charles had finally won over, and Simon and Ackerman were born to Wendy and Monica, his personal maids, both of whom wielded Zoan devil fruit powers. After setting aside his obsession with Irina's 6 daughters, Charles had moved decisively on, found 3 new companions, and fathered these children in turn. Now the ship bore down on the towering reversing mountain, its sheer cliffs looming against the sky. Pride swelled in Charles's chest. He leapt onto the highest rail, pointed toward the looming peak, and shouted to the crew, "Full speed ahead for the reversing mountain, then onward to the Western Sea." "Aye, Captain!" The sailors roared back, tightening the sails as the vessel surged forward toward its next great adventure. Up the upside-down mountain. Move! Charles's command rang out, and the crew surged forward at his heels. A chorus of thousands answered the call, their voices cutting through the low-hanging clouds that shrouded the summit. Atop the peak stood the inverted mountain lighthouse. Its great beacon, sweeping across is the roiling sea and guiding faint, lantern-lit vessels through treacherous waters. Inside the lantern room, a lone watchman tightened his grip on a harpoon. Leaning against the railing, he frowned into the veil of mist, scanning the horizon for any sign of ships or danger. Chapter 302, Upside-Down Mountain. At Charles's command, the ship surged forward, full sail toward the mouth of Upside-Down Mountain. Waves of red-tinted seawater thundered against the hull as the vessel cleaved through the choppy surf. Under the bright, cloudless sky, the massive craft bore down on the mountain's narrow entrance. "Captain!" The helmsman burst into Charles's cabin, clutching a sheaf of charts and calculation sheets. "I've run the numbers. The river's current inside the mountain isn't strong enough to push us through on its own. We'll need to boost the engines, or we'll come to a standstill." Charles frowned as he took the papers. The ship was hardly enormous, yet if Moonlight Moria could transform an entire island into a devil's spinnaker and sail the Grand Line over a decade ago, surely this challenge couldn't be beyond him. "Huh," he muttered, scanning the data. "Why aren't we making any headway?" The technician shifted uneasily, glancing from the figures to Charles. He hadn't expected the results, nor had he an immediate answer. Silence fell in the cramped cabin as the great ship pressed on toward the mysterious tumbling currents of Upside-Down Mountain. Charles waved dismissively. No need for explanations, just steam into Reversing Mountain and go full throttle. Yes, sir. The crew leapt into action. Currents swirled around the sea god Poseidon as its engines thundered to life. The roar echoed across the bay, scattering seagulls into frantic flight. The sleek black hull lunged forward like a drawn arrow. Once inside the channel, the Poseidon began its hair-raising ascent up the inverted mountain's winding riverbed. At nearly a 90-degree incline, the ship pitched as if on a roller coaster. Every man aboard clung to the handrails, wary that a single slip would send them tumbling into the frothing waters below. Far off, the tremor of the engines roused the tower guard. He strode out onto the rocky shore, harpoon in hand, a faded cloth scarf wrapped around his brow. Narrowing his eyes against the spray, he watched the vessel's black silhouette emerge from the North Sea. "By the gods, what a massive ship!" he muttered. "That flag, I know it. Could this be a newcomer?" The guard, Kulokas, leaned forward, his grip tightening on the harpoon as the sea god Poseidon surged up the channel, engine rumbling like distant thunder. The boat burst free of the river's current and shot straight up to the summit of Upside Down Mountain. "Ha! We did it!" Robert and the little ghosts cheered, their voices echoing across the rocky plateau. Below deck, Charles sat quietly in the captain's cabin. The navigator, pale and flustered, hovered at his side, muttering under his breath, "This defies all known science. Utterly impossible." Charles offered a faint smile, then rose and stepped out onto the deck. With a hiss of steam and creaking timbers, the ship's speed eased until it drifted gently atop the mountain's flat peak. Off in the distance stood a lone lighthouse, its lantern beams slicing through daylight as if it were dusk. A solitary figure leaned against the rail. Charles's lips curved into a grin. He raised his voice across the deck. "Hello there, are you the tower keeper?" Robert and the little ghosts, undeterred by strangers, scampered to the railing and peered curiously at the newcomer. He was a broad-shouldered, middle-aged man, his grip firm on a harpoon he carried like a walking stick. "I am indeed," the man called back. "Name's Kulokas, keeper of this tower." Kulokas's gaze swept over the ghostly crew clustered on deck, and his eyebrows shot up. "Well now," he said, "this is a first. Pirates who bring their children along for the voyage." Charles looked up expectantly. "Can you tell me where the West Sea is?" The sailor, thinking Charles's father might be bound for that very region, raised an eyebrow. "The West Sea? Weren't you planning to head to the Grand Line?" Charles frowned. He'd always heard that any pirate crew striking Upside Down Mountain plotted a course straight for the Grand Back Line. How could they be aiming for the West Sea instead? "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "Dad said something about sailing around the world first, then setting off for the Grand Line." "Sailing around the world?" muttered Kulokas, squinting at the battered pirate flag snapping in the wind above the deck. The black and gold skull struck him as oddly familiar, and the harder he stared, the more uneasy he felt. Without another word, he darted back to the lighthouse. Rummaging through stacks of old bounty posters and seafarers' gazettes, he hunted down every scrap bearing that same skull and crossbones. The Rockefeller's banner, one of the most notorious pirate crews in recent memory, stood out unmistakably among his collection. The Rockefellers had terrorized the North Sea for the past 2 years, wreaking havoc wherever they roamed. Clutching the matching wanted posters in his hands, Kulokas stormed back into the yard, voice ringing out loud enough for everyone on board to hear. "Those little devils are here." "You belong to the Rockefeller pirates," Kurokas challenged, stepping forward. A boy no older than 10 puffed out his chest. "Yes, we're the famous Rockefeller pirates of the New World, and my father is one of the 4 legendary pirates. Rockefeller Charles, the dread pirate with a 3.5 billion berry bounty." At that, little Robert's eyes sparkled with pride. He idolized his father above all else. Kurokas's expression twisted in sudden doubt, but before he could speak, Charles strode up and delivered a firm fist bump to each of the braggarts. "What kind of rubbish are you spouting?" Charles snapped. "Beat it!" Terrified, Robert and his friends scattered, clutching their heads as they fled. Charles turned back to Kurokas, studying him in silence. That single look froze Kurokas to the bone, as if he'd been plunged into an ice cellar. "So this is the great pirate of the New World," he thought, voice trembling. "He's nothing like the Roger pirates I've heard about. Deciding it was wiser to retreat, Kurokus hurried off in search of Rab. Charles, for his part, made no move to stop him. The boy's medical skills had caught Charles's eye, but recruiting another crewman wasn't worth abandoning Roger's treatment. And so Kurokus slipped away, leaving Charles to return to his duties. If Roger's life could not be prolonged by just a few more years, who else would carry on his dream of launching the Age of Great Voyages? Fortunately, the Rockefeller pirates boasted a surplus of medical talent, and at their head stood Dr. Niken, undisputedly the world's greatest physician. Ever since Niken consumed the miraculous medicinal fruit that Charles had provided, hardly any wound or illness has proven too severe for him to treat. In the past few years, the crew has suffered 0 non-combat losses. What's more, Niken is a master of traditional Chinese medicine, capable of concocting remedies for every conceivable ailment. Among his breakthroughs are elixirs that enhance the body's physical endurance. While Charles himself has little use for such potions, he already envisions them sustaining his own children through long campaigns. One restorative soak dispels the fatigue of an entire day, a feat so astonishing that even Charles, famous for his unflappable composure, finds himself in awe. Niken's talents do not stop there. He has perfected a beauty and whitening serum that has become a sensation among Elena and the other women of the crew. These formulations have done more than heal and refresh. They've generated considerable revenue for the Rockefeller pirates. By marketing a select number of these potions to eager buyers ashore, Charles has turned a handsome profit, ensuring the fleet remains both powerful and well-funded for the adventures yet to come. The cost to produce a single potion was only a few 100,000 Baileys, yet Charles boldly priced them at 1 billion Baileys each. Even with a markup of dozens of times the production cost, demand still far outstripped supply. The noblewomen of the Northern Sea Kingdoms snap up the Rockefeller pirates' potions as soon as they hit the market. This runaway success opened up an entirely new and far faster revenue stream for Charles, one that outpaced even the weapons trade. Today, thanks to Niken, the Rockefeller pirates' appointed god of wealth, all the expenses for Charles's planned circumnavigation are being covered entirely by potion sales. Chapter 303, The Banquet on Upside Down Mountain. Quickly, hoist the sails, we're almost at the summit. From the east, Charles spotted 3, or was it 4, pirate vessels pitching and rolling as they surged upriver toward the peak of Upside Down Mountain. Har, har, har! The great rote, the Redbeard pirates have arrived. On the lead ship, a broad-shouldered buccaneer with a flaming red beard bellowed his proclamation. He brandished a cutlass skyward, his roar echoing off the jagged cliffs. The commotion immediately drew the attention of the waiting Rockefeller pirates. Charles had just completed his own daring ascent to the mountaintop. He hadn't rushed on toward the West Sea as planned. Instead, he intended to linger here for a full day. Now he and his companions gathered at the mountain's crossroads, all eyes fixed on the approaching flotilla. At that moment, Kurokus stepped forward. He'd heard the clamor and emerged from the shadows to watch the ships draw near. By the stars, he muttered, shading his eyes against the dawn light, it really is the Redbeard pirates. Charles leaned in. Is something different about them this time? He asked. Kurokus hesitated, then shook his head in amazement. You'll see soon enough. Charles stood at the bow, wind whipping his dark hair as he squinted into the mist. From the crow's nest, Kurokus's excited voice crackled down. You've got eagle eyes, lad. That's no ordinary crew you've spotted. It's the Redbeard pirates. Charles nodded coolly. Kurokus continued. They're the undisputed overlords of the East China Sea. Over 1,000 men under Redbeard's command, a bounty of 1 billion berries, and 2.5 years of outrunning Vice Admiral Garp himself. Spotting them is a rare feat. Before Charles could reply, the mist parted to reveal a colossal warship. Its crimson sails billowed like blood, and a fearsome skull and crossbones flag snapped in the breeze. The pounding of its boarding gangplank echoed across the water. A booming voice challenged him. Hey there, little pirate, state your business. A towering figure emerged on the deck, scarred, bald, and clad in brass armor. He straddled the rail and stared down at Charles, sizing him up. Where do you hail from? Charles met the man's glare without flinching. The North Sea. The giant laughed, a deep, rolling sound. "Bay high, is it? And what's your bounty?" Charles let a faint, knowing smile curve his lips, but he remained silent. The captain's brow furrowed. He turned to his first mate, who hovered impatiently at his side. "Fetch your charts," the captain barked. "I want to see this North Sea upstart's ledger for myself." Charles kept his composure, every muscle ready for whatever came next. On both ships, tension crackled in the salt-thick air, for an introduction to the Redbeard pirates was rarely a matter of polite greetings. The wind tore at the tattered sails of the Redbeard pirates' ship, each strain of the mast a painful reminder of how close they were to sinking. From the quarterdeck, one-eyed Kulokas shouted over the roar of the sea. "Captain, look, that black ship over there. It's massive. Why don't we seize her? Our own vessel's about to go under." Redbeard's bushy crimson beard bristled as his eyes glinted with ambition. "A ship that grand would be perfect," he rumbled. "We'll claim her and sail straight into the New World. Then the world will know there's more to fear than the Whitebeard pirates. There are the Redbeard pirates, too." He slammed his fist into his palm. "And you, boy, come here." Charles stepped forward from the forecastle, his expression inscrutable. Redbeard circled him like a predator sizing up prey. "Give me that ship of yours," the captain snarled. "Surrender her to me, and I'll make you an officer in my crew." Charles's lips curved into a faint smile, but he said nothing. Redbeard's grin froze. "You insolent brat," he spat, drawing his cutlass so the blade gleamed in the dim light. "Hand over your ship, or I, Redbeard, swear I'll end you where you stand." The deck fell silent. Kulokas shook his head slowly, pity in his one good eye. Redbeard's face darkened. With a roar that shook the timbers, he lunged forward, cutlass raised, demanding an answer. "Boy, decide. Are you with me or against me?" "Charge! Kill them!" At the captain's command, a squad of Redbeard pirates lunged forward, swords raised. But before they could even reach him, a slender warrior in white stepped into their path. With the Saint Realm's sanctioning western sword gleaming at her side, she stood unflinching in front of the red-bearded crew. The pirate captain sneered at the sight of a little girl daring to block his men. His cruel grin froze, quite literally, when she murmured, "Binglan." A clear, melodic tone rang out as brilliant blue light streamed from her blade. Wherever the radiance touched, frost blossomed. With a single graceful slash, every pirate charging her was encased in ice, transforming them into lifelike statues that sparkled in the sun. The cobalt beam continued across the deck, encasing the ship and its scarlet-bearded captain in a thick shell of crystal. The vessel, now a frozen monument, drifted silently on the waves. Applause broke the tense hush. Charles clapped enthusiastically, a wide smile on his face. Watching Estes' display, he felt a surge of pride. Combined with her ice domain sword technique, that one strike was almost on par with a full-fledged swordsman's skill. And to think, Estes is only 12 years old. It won't be long before she breaks through to true mastery. Charles stood a few paces back, watching as Estes smoothly sheathed her sword. Pride and a touch of arrogance lit her expression. "Sis, that was incredible. One strike and they were all down." Right beside her, Sif let out a triumphant trill and instantly transformed into her ice-feathered form, Shui Fei, before swooping over to Estes' side. Kurokas observed the display with quiet curiosity, as if nothing about it was surprising. Estes ruffled Sif's hair and smiled. "You've got talent in that Shui fruit power of yours. Keep training, and you'll do great things." Sif's face fell. "Talent? My fruit barely scratches anyone. All I can do is shape basic elements. It's nowhere near as strong as Brother Robert's gas fruit." Estes gave her a gentle squeeze. "You're still young. Be patient. You'll catch up to me, I promise." Hearing that, Sif brightened instantly. "All right, sis, come taste the barbecue I made." Laughing, Estes let Sif tug her toward the crackling fire pit. Charles's heart swelled watching his sisters. Nothing beat a peaceful evening like this, surrounded by family, safe and united. Charles yelled, "Let's go, everyone, let's celebrate our ascension to Upside Down Mountain." Immediately, the banquet sprang to life. Over 1,000 crew members laid out their finest dishes and opened the feast atop the mountain. Charles turned to Kulokas and called, "Kulokas, come join the Rockefeller Pirates celebration." Kulokas hesitated, then nodded. Charles had invited her first, and to turn him down now would be too awkward. Soon, music filled the air as the Rockefeller Pirates' song and dance troupes took the stage one after another. Laughter and applause echoed across the hall. Yet Kulokas sat among the revelers in a daze, her eyes distant as if tracing old memories. The melodies wove around her, enchanting everyone, until something shifted. A colossal shape rose silently from the sea, looming offshore. Every head turned to watch its silent approach. "Rab!" someone exclaimed. At the sight of their friend Rab, tears welled in Kulokas's eyes. She rose to her feet, voice shaking with fierce determination. "Rab! I swear I will find the Rumba pirates. Alive or dead, we will meet." In that moment, her promise shone brighter than any torch atop Upside-Down Mountain, and the banquet seemed to pause in awe of her resolve. "It looks like I've only received the opening line. Please provide the full chapter text, and I'll transform it into a polished, coherent English version with Charles as your male protagonist." Chapter 304, Shifts in the New World West Blue. "Captain, we've officially crossed into the West Sea," Barrett called out as the Rockefeller flagship cut smoothly through the waves. Charles leaned forward, a pleased smile playing at his lips. "Excellent. Our true voyage begins now." He settled back into his chair, surveying the endless horizon. There was so much waiting for him here. The grand port of O'Hara, fated for ruin 8 years hence, a fate Charles intended to accelerate. The legendary hoard of the 8-treasure navy, amassed over centuries. All of it lay within his reach in the West Sea, and he'd come to claim it. Word of the Rockefeller pirates' arrival spread quickly through the world's great powers. Admiralty headquarters. The moment the news reached the War Council, Admiral Kong exploded with rage. He pounded his fist on the conference table. "Those Rockefeller pirates are out of control. After 2 years raiding the North Blue, now they sail straight into the West Sea. Are they trying to conquer every ocean in the world?" Silence fell as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Since the disastrous operation 2 years ago, the Admiralty had watched Rockefeller's advances with growing alarm, and now his entry into the West Sea threatened to upset the entire balance of power. As long as the Rockefeller pirates don't pull off any earth-shaking stunts, say publicly assassinating a king, the Navy headquarters will effectively look the other way. Right now, all of HQ's top-tier forces are massed in the New World. Aside from Fleet Admiral Zifa, every high-level unit is deployed overseas. Admiral Sengoku commands from the New World base, keeping the Golden Lion pirates under close watch, and Vice Admiral Garp relentlessly pursues the Roger pirates. The world government has vowed to capture Roger at any cost, and even though Charles Rockefeller has been cruising from one ocean to the next, he's still squarely in their sights. When the Marshal finished speaking, Fleet Admiral Zifa cleared his throat and asked, "So what's the order? Shall I drive Charles Rockefeller away, or merely put him on notice?" Zifa carried the weight of his last defeat like a wound that wouldn't heal. During that battle, a sudden asthma attack stole his breath and shattered his stamina. Ever since, the sting of failure has gnawed at him. For 2 years he's been nursing thoughts of revenge, but with each passing day, he can feel his strength slipping away. Marshal Sora shook his head in disappointment as he faced Vice Admiral Zepha. "Right now, your primary duty is to train the next generation of our Navy. Pirate forces in the New World are swelling by the day, and our fleet's strength is stretched perilously thin. Without a steady influx of capable sailors, we'll never regain control of the seas or restore peace." Ziffa exhaled a soft sigh, but offered no reply. His eyes refused to meet Sora's, and the older officer tapped his finger against his jaw in frustration. "The New World has become a lawless wasteland," Sora continued. "Ever since the Rockefeller pirates withdrew their main fleet from the Central Archipelago, no one has filled that power vacuum. Rival crews are now locked in vicious skirmishes for supremacy, and the Grand Line's heart has turned into a battlefield." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in before zeroing in on the most alarming threat. At the center of it all stands the Big Mom pirate crew. Charles Lingling, silent for nearly 8 years, has reemerged, unleashing his children in a rampage across the islands. These aren't ordinary brats. Each son and daughter is a formidable fighter, honed by Charles himself. In just weeks, they've overrun several key islands, drawing every pirate and Navy squadron into their orbit. Zepha frowned, his hesitation finally giving way to concern. Sora leaned closer, voice firm. We need stronger combat power, both seasoned officers and fresh recruits, to push back the pirates and secure these waters. That's why your training program is mission critical, Zephyr. The future of the Navy and the safety of countless islands depends on it. Admiral Kong cleared his throat as he stood before the assembled officers. Gentlemen, the Totland Sea, particularly the cluster of islands around Cake Island, has become the epicenter of a new power block. Every day, their influence grows. He gestured, and an aide stepped forward with a large bounty poster. Admiral Kong pointed to the face displayed. Charles Lingling's bounty has just been raised to 31 billion berries, only 4 billion less than Rockefeller Charles himself. Clearly, the Navy regards him as a top priority. With a nod, Kong signaled for more papers to be distributed. I'm also issuing reward orders for every one of Lingling's key lieutenants. None of their bounties is under 100 million berries. All intelligence and these new reward notices are in your hands now. As the senior officers sifted through the documents, worried murmurs rippled around the room. The very notion that the Big Mom pirate fleet could field such formidable personnel left even veteran admirals grim-faced. Admiral Kong's voice cut through the tension. With the Big Mom pirates launching fresh offensives, it makes sense that Charles Lingling is on track to become the next Rockefeller Charles, firmly establishing his power in the New World. Staff Officer Crane raised an eyebrow and consulted his dossier. Admiral, do the Rockefeller pirates have wind of these developments yet? Lieutenant Sora frowned as she considered the question. After a moment's hesitation, she replied quietly, "It's only a matter of time, sir. They're bound to learn it soon." Although the bulk of the Rockefeller pirates has sailed on, they left a formidable squadron patrolling the waters off Came Island. We need to get this report to Charles Rockefeller at once. Why haven't the Rockefeller pirates responded? Admiral Crane frowned. And why would they allow the Big Mom pirates to absorb their territory without a fight? As a senior naval officer, Crane could not fathom the pirates' true purpose in these seas. Were they simply out for a pleasure cruise? It seemed absurdly naive, especially if they were willing to let their own allies be overrun. Her question sent a ripple of unease through the conference room. Admirals and captains exchanged worried glances. None of them understood Rockefeller's motives. At last, Vice Admiral Saito cleared his throat. Our best chance to rein in Big Mom and curb her expansion is to force the Rockefeller pirates back into the New World, where we can blockade them. But without any intelligence on their objectives, it will be nearly impossible to predict their next move, much less compel them to retreat. Crane let out a long, exasperated sigh. There was no denying it. The Rockefeller pirates had already trampled every treaty in their path. Captain Sora, standing nearby, shook his head and whispered, "This just got a lot more complicated." "Let's set that aside for now," Sora said, rubbing his temples. "The real problem lies in the latter half of the New World. Remember the alliance of Wang Ji, John, and Silver Axe? They joined forces to take on the Whitebeard pirates, but everything went disastrously wrong. Wang Shi's crew and Silver Axe's men never trusted each other, and before long, they opened fire. Both captains fell, their fleets were shattered, and the remnants were no match for John's company. Even John himself didn't survive. His crews turned on him over an uneven split of spoils, assassinating their captain and tearing the entire outfit apart. The world government's scheme to keep pirate powers in check by pitting them against one another has completely backfired. A heavy silence fell across the meeting room. After a moment, Sora cleared his throat and continued. Then there's the Red Earl, Patrick Redfield. In recent years, he's been a whirlwind of chaos, relentlessly challenging major players in the New World, from the Roger Pirates and the Flying Pirates to the Whitebeard Pirates. His rise has been so rapid and so fierce that he's now near lie as notorious as the four emperors themselves. Because Charles never took on any underlings, the very pirates he'd turned away sneeringly dubbed him the Lone Red. A one-man pirate, unbacked by any crew, can be far more dangerous than one with a fleet at his command. Chapter 305, The First Battle of the West Sea. Admiral Kong unfolded the latest bounty sheet. The Red Earl, Patrick Redfield. In just 2 years, his bounty had leapt from 20 billion berries to an astonishing 26 billion. the fastest rise of any pirate in recent memory. Without lingering doubts about his lack of firepower, the Navy would have slapped a 30 billion berry price tag on his head in an instant. Naval officers across the Admiralty exchanged frowns as they absorbed the news. They had assumed that with Rockefeller Charles gone from the New World, their operations would become simpler, less crowded by powerful pirate factions. Ever since the Rockefeller pirates slipped into the four seas, the Admiralty had turned a blind eye, keeping only half an eye on their movements. But Charles's departure had only opened the door for even bigger threats. First came Lingling, one of the last remnants of the Rock's pirates who roamed the New World's outer reaches and struck without warning. Now, the Red Earl himself had risen to terrorize the Grand Line. Two legendary names, both untouchable, both wreaking havoc, while the Navy found itself powerless to stop them. What was meant to be a respite had instead become the stage for the first great battle of the West Sea. Fleet Admiral Kong's gaze swept across the chamber. Compared to the Flying Sky Pirates and the Whitebeard Pirates, these newcomers in the New World are downright restrained. But make no mistake, the New World is thoroughly overrun by pirates. Its people are suffering under their thumb. A tense silence followed. None of the admirals dared to argue. Marshal Kong's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Admiral Crane slammed his dossier onto the table. There's simply no way for our fleet to operate on a large scale out there. The moment we send a warship beyond Fishman Island, one of those pirate super teams will ambush us. We'd never even get a foothold. Crane's voice cracked with frustration. All we can do now is build our strength in the East Blue and wait for a decisive shift in power. Then, when the time is right, we strike, sweep through the New World, and restore the Navy's honor. Every admiral in attendance bowed their heads in grim agreement. Fleet Admiral Kong nodded. Meeting adjourned. Return to your posts. Fulfill your duties. Protect what remains of the Navy's good name. Admiral Sora stood and swept his cloak aside. With a crisp salute, he addressed the officers lining the walls. Yes, sir. The lacquered doors closed behind them, and the room emptied in solemn silence, each man and woman already plotting the long, hard road back to dominance. Charles stood at attention as the marshal called the meeting to a close. Dismissed, he announced. In unison, the generals snapped to their feet, saluted crisply, and filed out of the office. Charles lingered a moment longer, still reeling from the shocks of the day. His usual confidence felt shaken. Today's revelations had called his own sense of justice into question. All he wanted now was the comfort of routine, the new recruits drilling in the training camp below. Teacher Charles, is the meeting over? A familiar voice called. Charles looked up to see Kuzan striding toward him, a mischievous grin on his face. Kuzan, what are you doing here? Kuzan tipped a large, dusty bottle in Charles's direction. Thought you might need this. Brought the finest wine I could find. Care to join me? A genuine smile broke across Charles's features for the first time that day. You read my mind. Come on, let's grab a drink. He draped an arm over Kuzan's shoulders, and together they headed down the corridor toward the mess hall, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. Meanwhile, far to the west, the Rockefeller fleet made its grand entrance into the West Sea. Cannon fire tore through the dawn mist. Bang, 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 as a band of ragged pirates, their eyes wild with desperation, rose up to meet them. These self-styled marauders had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Their battered ships unleashed a barrage of flares and cannonballs, determined to announce their arrival in the most explosive fashion. But the Rockefeller pirates were ready. From the quarterdeck of their flagship, Admiral Marlowe surveyed the scene with steely resolve. Hold formation, he roared. We take no prisoners. No rogue ship stands in our way. As the booming volleys intensified, Charles and Kuzan, long since finished with their wine, received word of the outbreak of battle. Charles's doubts melted away, replaced by the familiar rush of adrenaline. Justice, he reminded himself, wasn't just an idea, it was something you defended with steel and cannon fire. He turned to Kuzan, eyes alight with purpose. This is it. Ready? With a single nod, they raced toward the docks, where the Rockefeller frigates lay in wait. The sea spray stung their faces, but neither man hesitated. Above the roar of battle, Charles's voice carried clearly, for the fleet, and for what's right. The two comrades leapt aboard their ship, setting sail into the fray as the West Sea erupted into war. "These low-level pirates really don't know how to live, or die," Caesar called out, hovering above the deck as wave after wave of pirates poured onto the ship. "Brother Caesar, just hang back and watch," Tesla shouted up at him, slicing through a pirate who lunged with a cutlass. "Don't get in our way. Let us handle this." The one-eyed pirate captain snarled in frustration. He spat onto the planks. "Where are the real fighters? You lot aren't even worth my father's time. Brothers, show them no mercy." With a roar, the pirates surged forward. Tesla sprang into the fray, his long knife whistling through the air as he cut down every man who stood before him. At the same time, Charles, no longer content to hover at the edge of battle, dashed forward and planted himself in the captain's path. "Swerve right if you want to live. This way is closed," Charles said coolly, crossing his sword with the captain's blade. The pirate captain gaped at Charles in disbelief, rage twisting his features. Then he bellowed, "Slaughter them all!" At his command, dozens of pirates charged headlong into Tesla, Charles, and their friends. Steel rang against steel as the young fighters met every thrust, parry, and slash with deadly precision. Within minutes, the deck was littered with fallen pirates, 40-odd bodies sprawled in pools of blood. Caesar landed lightly beside Charles and Tesla, surveying the carnage with a satisfied grin. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted. "No wonder they never stood a chance." Tesla sheathed his knife and wiped it clean. Charles paused for a moment, catching his breath, then met Caesar's gaze. "Next time," he said quietly, "they'll think twice before stepping aboard our ship." Charles leaned against the stern rail, a glass of red wine in hand, as the salt-tinged breeze tousled his hair. He watched with a faint, satisfied smile while his children dispatched the last of the pirates with effortless precision. Now came their favorite part, the treasure hunt. "Come on! Which way to the captain's cabin?" Robert shouted, already sprinting forward. Didara, Sif, and Eve raced at his heels, while Tesla followed at a more leisurely pace. On the deck, the youngest, Logan, and the others, huddled around the fallen pirates, curiously probing at their abandoned weapons. Charles had orchestrated it this way not to raise killing machines, but to instill courage. He himself had been forged in the fires of conflict. He only wanted his children to learn fearlessness. "Dad! Dad! Look what I found!" Robert's excited cry snapped Charles from his reverie. He glanced up, curious. Never before had any of them shouted out like this, not over ordinary loot. Charles straightened, a spark of anticipation in his eyes. Whatever Robert had uncovered this time, it had to be something truly extraordinary. Charles was lounging on the deck when Robert came hurtling out of the captain's quarters, cradling a chest the size of a basketball. Half a dozen wide-eyed siblings trailed behind him, buzzing with excitement. "Aunt! Dad! I found a devil fruit!" Robert shouted, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. Charles sat up at once. "You did! Let me see it!" Devil fruits were one of his few true obsessions. Robert and the others skidded to a stop at Charles's feet and handed over the little treasure chest. With a smile, Charles flipped open the lid, and there it was, resting in muted splendor, a pale, ash-gray fruit, its surface patterned with faint swirling lines. "Go fetch my devil fruit catalog from my cabin," Charles said, his voice brimming with anticipation. "Right away!" Robert dashed off. Moments later, he returned with a well-worn illustrated book. Charles opened it and began comparing each entry to the mysterious fruit before him. Before he could turn the next page, Tesla strode onto the deck, clutching a weathered, leather-bound logbook. "The rest of the pirate ship's been picked clean," she announced. Around her, crew members pored over stacks of ledgers and manifests brimming with staggering figures. "They've left behind financial records worth 4 billion berries," she added, eyes gleaming at the thought of so vast a fortune. Charles closed the catalog and leaned forward, excitement dancing in his eyes. Between the devil fruit in his hands and the promise of an enormous treasure, the day had suddenly become very, very interesting. The pirate crew was unusually well-heeled. They'd captured a merchant vessel, tailed the Poseidon until they reached a secluded island, and then sold the prize ship. When the sale went through, fetching hundreds of millions, they'd all receive their cut. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than enough to keep every hand on board well supplied with rum for a long while. Meanwhile, Charles sank into a wooden chair in the captain's cabin and studied the devil fruit illustrations laid out before him. One image in particular made his heart skip. He leaned closer, tracing the delicate lines. "A castle fruit?" he whispered in disbelief. "It actually exists." Chapter 306. Charles held the devil fruit in his hand, eyes widening in astonishment. "It really is the castle fruit. I never expected to find one of these here." His father's brow furrowed in confusion, and the nearby crew members pressed closer, their curiosity piqued. Robert, growing impatient at being beaten to the discovery, called out, "Dad, what kind of devil fruit is that?" Charles turned to Robert with an easy grin. "It's a paramecia-type devil fruit called the castle fruit. Its power lets you transform the inside of your body into a fully functional fortress. You can store anything inside, even parts of yourself, and anything you admit shrinks down to fit. Once it leaves your personal range, it returns to its normal size. In other words, it's like carrying your own castle on your back. It's an incredibly versatile ability." Gently, Charles replaced the fruit in its protective wooden box. "We definitely need to add this to our collection." Robert's chest swelled with pride as he looked around at his siblings, triumphant. Charles couldn't help but remember that this fruit had once belonged to Capone Beji. He'd never imagined it would surface so soon in the West Blue, or that it would turn up on this very pirate ship. Robert's eager voice broke through his thoughts. "Dad, what should we do next?" Chapter 8. The Pirate's Diary. Tesla stood at the head of the table, holding a weathered leather journal in his hands. "I've just finished translating the captain's diary," he announced, excitement bright in his eyes. It turns out the pirate crew stumbled across a devil fruit on a deserted island. None of them knew what it was, so their one-eyed captain clipped it in his trunk instead of eating it. He plans to sell it at the auction house run by the 5 great families in the West Sea. Charles leaned forward and let out a low chuckle. "A pirate diary?" he asked. "This I have to see." He held out his hand, and Tesla passed him the battered volume. Charles flipped through the yellowed pages, skimming neat script that recorded every day at sea, the brutal storms, fierce skirmishes with merchant vessels, and, most intriguing, how the crew first encountered the strange, swirling fruit beneath the jungle canopy. The captain had even detailed why he'd never dared taste it. Rumors of impossible abilities, curses best left untouched, and an auction waiting in the West Sea. He paused over an entry dated just 3 days ago. The captain had set sail for a notorious pirate stronghold, an island governed by crime lords and cutthroats, specifically to consign the devil fruit to auction. Ever the sentimentalist, the one-eyed pirate had poured every hope and fear into this diary. Charles smiled, closing the book with a decisive snap. "Looks like our course is set. If this devil fruit is truly as powerful as the captain feared, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands. There's an auction coming up on that island of rogues, and we're going to crash it." He met each crew member's gaze in turn. "Prepare the ship. We sail for the West Sea at dawn." An eager murmur ran around the room. Tesla nodded, already moving to relay orders to the deck. Charles tucked the pirate's diary under his arm. The path ahead was clear. Retrieve a mysterious devil fruit from the heart of a pirate den before someone else claimed its power, and perhaps discovered exactly why the original captain had been so frightened of tasting it. As the lanterns flickered and the crew scattered to ready the ship, Charles allowed himself a final, determined grin. An auction full of the world's most ruthless opportunists would be the perfect place for an unexpected storm, and he intended to be the one who walked away with the prize. Charles inhaled sharply and nodded. "Yes!" A ripple of excitement spread through the crowd. It was always a thrill to witness another auction, and today's spectators, especially the younger ones, were positively buzzing. A gaggle of little specters flitted across the deck, their translucent forms dancing with glee. "An auction! Have you ever seen one?" they chattered among themselves. Charles pinched the bridge of his nose, recalling his own harrowing experiences. He'd only ever attended 2 auctions, but both had left scars he'd never forget. The first took place in the fabled Water Capital, where the Red Earl and Charles himself had been paraded and sold as slaves. The second was on the remote Chambord Islands, a fiasco that erupted into chaos when Steelbone Kong a monstrous enforcer, laid waste to the naval admiral in attendance. The admiral had nearly died, and Charles swore afterward that no one was safe in the auction houses. That was why he rarely ventured to these events anymore. Still, here he was again, drawn back, curiosity warring with caution. Would this auction be different, or would it, too, brim with danger? Ahead lay Carden Island, a notorious speck in the West Sea. Gangsters ruled its jumbled streets in Crooked Port, and rumors said the auction house there was as ruthless as any pirate crew. Charles squared his shoulders, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. This time, he vowed, he wouldn't be caught off guard. Chapter X. Charles had pieced together the island's secret. 5 mighty crime families held sway here: the Furdos, Lucianos, Capones, Campinos, and Gottis. Rumor foretold that one day Becky Capone would unite them all under her banner, though the future heiress was barely born. For now, it was the Furdo clan that stood tallest, its reach and resources eclipsing the other 4 houses. Yet Charles refused to be daunted. Raw strength was one thing, but it wasn't invincible. To avoid tipping his hand, he kept his arrival discreet, making no grand proclamations as his ship drew near Carden Island. With every mile, the harbor grew more crowded. Merchant vessels of every size drifted between patrolling warships, and the luxurious yachts of West Sea nobility bobbed at anchor. Even pirate sloops drifted among them, a surreal sight made stranger by the fact that Royal Navy officers were leaning on a pirate's rail, laughing and swapping tales as if they were old friends. Charles couldn't help but be intrigued by the Navy's activity in East Blue. This auction was turning out to be far more interesting than he had first imagined. Through one of his covert contacts, the King of Usury, Charles already possessed detailed intelligence on every major power operating in the region. The moment the notorious loan shark learned of Charles Rockefeller's arrival, he immediately forwarded all his gathered information to the young pirate captain. Since pledging his allegiance to Charles, the King of Usury's financial empire had flourished under the Rockefeller banner, spanning the Grand Line, the 4 seas, and even into the perilous reaches of the New World. Every year, without fail, the magnate sent Charles an extravagant birthday gift, a gesture of loyalty and gratitude. Charles also owed a peculiar debt of thanks to Ling Ling. Her relentless pursuit of him had unintentionally reshaped the balance of power among the 6 emperors of the Dark World in the New World. 3 of those titanic overlords, the King of Usury, the King of Shippers, and the King of News, had broken from Ling Ling's circle to swear fealty to the Rockefeller pirates. The remaining 3, the Queen of Mary Street, the King of Assassins, and the King of Storages, had instead pledged themselves to the Big Mom pirates. This division among the 6 emperors was a direct result of the ever-shifting alliances and ruthless rivalries that marked the New World. Standing on the deck of the auction ship, Charles surveyed the gathering of pirates, marines, and underworld figures. He knew that in this sea of potential enemies and allies, only those quickest to adapt would survive and dominate. Pirates now hold undisputed sway over the New World, and only 3 names inspire true awe: Whitebeard, the Golden Lion Shiki, and Charles. Yet despite their fame, genuine alliances among them are all but non-existent. Whitebeard spurns any cooperation, and Shiki jealously hoards his spoils. Only Charles seems entirely indifferent to such politics. But contempt and mistrust run even deeper among the 6 emperors themselves. The King of Killers bears a bitter grudge against Charles, making any partnership between them unthinkable. Stussy, the self-styled Queen of the Happy Street, tried desperately to draw Charles into her orbit, only to be rebuffed at every turn, her ambitious schemes collapsing before they could begin. Left vulnerable, she was forced to seek protection from a more powerful pirate lord, and so she set her sights on Charlotte Linlin, the fearsome Big Mom. Linlin's fleets still lay cooped in the waters of Totoland, but her potential for growth was undeniable. Before long, even the so-called Warehouse King admitted that an alliance with Linlin promised far greater rewards than any deal with Charles. In that moment, the 6 emperors split into 2 hostile camps, each determined to outmaneuver the other in a rivalry every bit as fierce as the fiercest naval battle. Charles could almost feel the last trace of the dog's feral fury slipping away. Of all the hired killers present, the so-called king of assassins, lost his edge first, his power ebbing faster than any of the others. Those merciless blades might have been terrifying to common folk, but against genuine heavyweights, they would be cut down without mercy. Chapter 307, The Invitation Letter. The 6 emperors of the Dark World had split into 2 rival factions, and open conflict was growing fiercer by the day. Both sides now leaned heavily on the backing of Charles and his partner, Lingling, an opportunity the two seized to secure their own foothold in the Dark World. Charles's arms trade had already spread across the globe through his Dark World contacts. His reputation for reliable, state-of-the-art weaponry was so strong that even the Navy now placed regular orders. Those profits had become his principal income. Raiding islands alone could never sustain the nearly 6,000 pirates under his command. Now his massive ironclad warship loomed over a bustling port. Charles stood at the gangplank, surveying the throng of sailors, merchants, and off-world traders milling about the docks. "All right, everyone," he called, voice carrying above the din. "Let's go ashore and have a look around, and feel free to pick up anything you need, treat it as a bit of shore leave." His crew cheered and began to disembark, eager to stretch their legs and explore. But a ship of that size, hundreds of meters in length, armored in forged steel, was a rare sight here. Whispers rippled through the crowds as dockworkers paused in their labors to stare. One keen-eyed longshoreman's expression suddenly went pale. He pointed at the ship, recognition flashing in his eyes. He turned on his heel and dashed toward a nearby office, worry etched on his face. Inside, the portmaster looked up at the alarming knock. Before he could speak, the dockworker burst in. "Sir, it's them," he panted. "Captain Charles's ironclad is docked. He's here." As the portmaster processed the words, a hush fell over the harbor. Charles's arrival had just become the most dangerous event the Dark World had seen in years. The Rockefeller Pirates' flagship, the Poseidon, was impossible to miss. Its massive prow was carved in the likeness of Poseidon gripping the sea god's trident, a bold emblem of Charles Rockefeller's power. It wasn't long before word spread through the underworld. The Rockefeller Pirates had just dropped anchor off Carden Island. That announcement sent shockwaves through the 5 great crime families. Within minutes, their patriarchs were summoned to an emergency meeting. They gathered in a shadowed hall of a granite fortress, seated around a wide, circular table. 5 figures, each bearing the insignia of a different syndicate, studied the same urgent dispatch. Pinned to the notice board were photographs of the landing party. There, unmistakably, stood Charles Rockefeller himself. A tense hush fell over the room. One of the lords broke it first. "This isn't a coincidence," he said, voice low. "We still feel the scars of that battle 2 years ago. If Charles means trouble, Carden Island won't survive." At the head of the table, an elderly man with finely combed silver hair adjusted his pince-nez and spoke. "Then let's be frank. Who can tell me why Charles Rockefeller has sailed to Carden Island now? We cannot afford any secrets or surprise attacks, not after what happened last time." His eyes, cold and precise, swept over the other 4. "I want answers, today." Patriarch Ferdo, the eldest among the assembled leaders, sat at the head of the long table. His reputation as the strongest of the 5 great families was well known. He regarded the others with a calm, piercing gaze. "Are you accusing us of inviting the Rockefeller pirates here?" Ferdo asked, his tone deceptively light. "Surely you know that Carden Island lies under the joint protection of all 5 families. If it falls to ruin, we'll all share the blame and the loss." The representative of the Luciano family, seated immediately to Ferdo's left, bristled at the implication. As the second most powerful clan after Ferdo's, the Lucianos were always eager to draw their rival into conflict. "Patriarch," he sneered, "if you're so innocent, why did the pirates show up on our shores in the first place?" From Ferdo's right came a sharp retort. The head of the Capone family, longtime allies of the Ferdos, leaned forward. "Luciano, don't twist his words. Ferdo never fingered your family. You sound nervous." Luciano merely smirked, lit a cigar, and let the smoke curl lazily upward. At that moment, the rulers of the Gambino and Gotti families exchanged tense glances at the far end of the table, hands resting on holstered sidearms. Ferdo's eyes flicked to Luciano, then settled back on the group. "None of us expected the Rockefeller pirates," he said quietly. Their arrival changes everything. We're dealing with a dragon crossing the river, an adversary far beyond ordinary, Don Furdo announced, glancing around at the gathered heads of the 5 great families. We mustn't provoke them. I've already ordered our men to stand down, and we've extended a formal invitation for tomorrow's summit on behalf of all of us. Don Capone nodded firmly. Exactly. No provocations. The patriarchs of the other 2 families murmured their agreement in turn. Only Don Luciano remained silent, the smoke from his cigar curling around him like a shroud. At last he drew deeply, exhaled, and met Furdo's gaze. Very well, he said. If this is our unanimous decision, I'll follow your lead. With that, he rose and strode from the chamber without another word. His abrupt departure sent a ripple of whispers through the hall. Furdo's eyes flickered with barely concealed hostility, though none dared meet his glare. Don Capone lowered his head, brow creased in thoughtful restraint. Outside, Charles, who had been wandering the street with a small retinue, noticed the sudden flurry of activity at the building's entrance. Instantly, he signaled his guards. Within seconds, they formed a protective ring around the women in their party, weapons at the ready, every eye alert to the rising tension. Charles looked up and, surprisingly, sensed no murderous intent, only a wave of fear rolling toward him. A dozen men in black suits were striding his way. From the tattoo curling around one man's cuff and the ink just visible at another's collar, Charles knew exactly who they were. Gangsters. Curious, Charles halted in his tracks, waiting to see what they intended. The mobsters stopped 10 meters from him and formed a loose semicircle. Their leader's face was unnervingly calm, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his panic. Charles studied him in silence. Around Charles, his own companions tensed, hands closing around hidden weapons. Yet Charles felt no hostility from their visitors, only raw anxiety. He raised a hand in a placating gesture. "Stand down," he ordered softly. At that, the tension in the suited men visibly eased. The leader's chest rose and fell rapidly. His heart had hammered at the thought of violence. The earlier flicker of deadly intent Charles had projected had clearly rattled them. Clearing his throat, the man managed a shaky greeting. Hello. I'm Representative Fay. Mr. Furdo is here." The suited attendant's voice trembled as he stepped forward, drawing an envelope from his pocket. "This is an invitation to tomorrow's auction. I hope you'll accept it." He bowed deeply, holding the letter aloft. Charles Rockefeller gave a slight nod to his guards. Instantly, Caesar Courant strode forward, took the document, and handed it to Charles. Charles broke the seal and scanned the finely printed script, an official summons from the Furdo family. "Excellent. I'll be there," he declared. He had come only to observe, but with an invitation in hand, how could he refuse? Tomorrow's auction would feature devil fruits, objects of almost obsessive fascination for Charles, and he wouldn't miss it for the world. It was a small task for Caesar to deliver an invitation. If Charles had realized how eager his lieutenant was to serve him, he might never have spared him this errand. "Thank you," Charles said, slipping the letter into his coat. "On behalf of the Furdo family, we welcome the esteemed Mr. Charles Rockefeller." The attendant in black visibly relaxed, relief washing over his features now Had the matter had been resolved so smoothly. Sergei inclined his head. "Well, I won't keep you any longer. If you ever need anything, just let me know. I'm Sergei, the leader of this block." With a final respectful bow, he stepped back and fell silent. Chapter 308, Kadan Island Auction. As soon as the locals caught sight of the group gathered in the middle of the street, they stopped in their tracks. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who were these people, who even the island's toughest gangsters treated with unwavering respect? Charles lifted the crisp invitation letter in his hand and addressed his family with a broad smile. "Who wants to attend the auction tomorrow?" "I do. Me. Pick me." A chorus of eager voices erupted as his children, those little rascals, threw up their hands, eyes shining with excitement as they stared at their father. Chuckling at their enthusiasm, Charles nodded. "All right then, we'll go, together." He knew, of course, that they couldn't bring the entire household. An auction crowd of 1,000 would overwhelm the venue, and their own preparations back home would suffer. So he made a decision. Only he, his wife, and the kids would attend in person. The others would mind the estate and keep things running smoothly in their absence. After all, Charles had come to Cadden Island partly out of boredom and partly so the children could learn a few lessons about high-stakes dealings. Morning arrived swiftly, and with it, the anticipation swelled. Apart from the island's 5 great families, nobody suspected that the formidable Rockefeller pirates were about to make an appearance at the auction. Although everyone had heard of Charles Rockefeller, the 5 great houses had conspired to suppress any mention of the Rockefeller pirates. If word ever got out that they were on the island, the auction would be canceled at once. Everyone would flee, and no respectable noble would dare consort with a pirate crew. Over the years, the world government had worked tirelessly to brand the Rockefeller pirates and their notorious captain Charles Rockefeller as the most ruthless criminals on the seas. So it was nothing short of a spectacle when Charles arrived at the auction house. He disembarked from a sleek black launch and strode up the marble steps, accompanied by a lavish retinue of wives and children. Their finery gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the murmurs from the assembled guests rose to a crescendo. Sarge, who had been waiting anxiously by the entrance, nearly stumbled over himself in his haste. Bowing deeply, he sprang forward to greet them. "Captain Rockefeller, welcome. Please, allow me to escort you inside." Instantly, all eyes turned. The other invitees, each clutching the single gilded ticket that guaranteed their admission, stood frozen as Charles's entire entourage swept past the velvet rope. A tall duke, his face flush with indignation, snapped to his feet. "What is the meaning of this? Someone from the Furto family is personally ushering him in." "I don't know who these people are," whispered a baroness to her companion, "but whoever they are, they must be supremely powerful to override the guest list. And look at how many of them there are. We're only allowed 1 invitation each." A gruff voice near the back muttered, "Pirate scum have more privileges than us." The crowd bristled, but nobody dared challenge Sergei's ceremonious bow or Charles's silent, imperious glance. The gates closed behind them with a soft click, and the auction hall, once a place of polite restraint, grew tense with curiosity and resentment. Charles's crew bristled at the insult. "They let those great Wolf King pirates boss us around out there? I'll skin them alive," one of them spat. "Easy, easy," another pleaded. "This is 5 families' territory in the West Sea. Our real prize is the devil fruit. You don't want to spook the snake before we've caught it." Voices clamored over one another until Charles shot them a single frosty glance. The room fell silent so quickly that everyone felt as if an ice storm had passed through. Over the years, Charles's name and reputation had grown to the point where even seasoned pirates dared not challenge his authority. "Have some respect," he said quietly. "We're here on business." Sarge, the auction master, took in the suddy hush and hurried forward, bowing so low that sweat beaded on his brow. "My apologies, Captain Charles," he stammered. "Right this way." He swung open a massive steel door to reveal a vault larger than most merchant holds, enough room not only for Charles's entourage, but for every chest and crate they'd brought. Lanterns hung from the vaulted ceiling, illuminating piles of gold doubloons, priceless artifacts, and crates stamped with the royal seal of the Saint family. It was the perfect hideaway for selling illicit treasure. Sarge gestured courteously as Charles stepped inside. "Captain, if you require anything, refreshments, extra guards, just say the word. I'll be right outside." He retreated with a flourish, shutting the heavy door behind him. Charles set his duffel bag on a crate, eased himself onto a cushioned bench, and raised a porcelain teacup to his lips. He let the steaming brew settle him before speaking. "I came to this auction to sell, not to buy. I have several items to offer. Begin your preparations." At his words, Sergei, lingering in the doorway like a startled deer, froze. Then he bowed once more, face lighting up in relief and excitement. "Very good, Captain. We will open the floor at once." Charles took a measured sip of tea, eyes already wandering over the glimmering treasure around him. Outside, the paddles began to snap, and the murmured anticipation of a room full of bidders drifted in. The game had begun. "What do we have here?" Sergei asked, leaning forward as Charles gave a dismissive wave. Niken stepped up, lifting a lacquered box and sliding off its lid. Inside lay 10 vials of shimmering emerald-green liquid. "These," Charles announced, "are vials of the elixir of longevity. A single dose restores youthful radiance to the skin and can add years to the lifespan. It's completely safe for both men and women. Sergei's brow furrowed. A beauty potion that promised real, measurable effects? It sounded too good to be true. Had Charles not produced the elixir himself, Sergei would have turned on his heel and walked away. Noticing his hesitation, Charles pressed on. Believe me, the quality is impeccable. When it first hit Beihai, the nobility snatched every vial at 5,000 million Baileys apiece. I guarantee its authenticity, any adverse reaction, and I'll take full responsibility. Sergei fell silent. After a moment's thought, he nodded. All right, sir. I'll take these to the lab for verification. If they check out, we'll bid you a generous price. Cradling the box, Sergei strode toward the back rooms, Nikin following close behind. Charles watched them go, confident. Nikin's groundbreaking formula, born from the finest traditions of Chinese medicine, would soon prove its worth. Soon, Sergei bounded over, a broad grin lighting up his face. Sir, our master has just appraised your lot, he announced. He confirmed its special qualities, so the auction house has saved it for the finale. It's sure to bring an excellent price. Charles simply nodded, no words needed. Sergei took the cue, slipped away, and quietly closed the door behind him. Almost at once, the room buzzed with renewed energy. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Charles glanced over at the ladies seated beside him. Please, he said, offering a polite nod, bid on anything you like. Don't hold back. His invitation set them alight. These women loved nothing more than the thrill of the bid, the excitement of owning something rare. When the next lot, a dazzling collection of diamond and sapphire necklaces, appeared on the stand, Martha could hardly contain herself. She shot to her feet and, paddle raised high, cried, 1,000,000 Baileys. Her bid was twice the opening price, and a ripple of astonishment ran through the crowd. Charles watched the necklaces with cool detachment. Glittering gems and precious metals meant little to him. Only when Martha leaned forward to try one on, slipping a necklace around her graceful neck, did he feel the faintest stir of interest. Charles leaned back in the private tie-in box, listening to the excited chatter of the women around him. One lot after another had been displayed, each item photographed and streamed live to eager bidders. Now the auctioneer cleared his throat and held up the next piece with a flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer boomed, our next offering is a sword prized by masters the world over. Please direct your attention to the Jianyu. He yanked away the crimson drape and revealed a sleek, double-edged blade. The Jianyu ranks among the legendary 51 grand swords. It's exceedingly rare. Every swordsman worth his salt will want this in his collection. Even Rockefeller Shia, the world's #1 swordsman, wields a double-edged blade. If you dare to challenge him someday, don't let this chance slip by. A ripple of excitement swept through the crowd. Charles watched the sword glint under the gallery lights and couldn't suppress a small, wry smile. Well, I'll be, he murmured. They really are using my name. His younger brother Robert, eyes sparkling, elbowed him. Dad, should we give them a little demonstration? Show them why the Jianyu bears our family's legacy? Before their father could answer, their kid brother Estes chimed in, tugging at his sleeve. Yeah, and can I snap a picture of it first? Charles covered his face with one hand. Honestly, you two, enough. We're here to bid, not put on a show. Robert's shoulders slumped in disappointment. Estes pouted, but Charles shook his head and sighed. Fine, maybe next time. With that, the auctioneer called for opening bids, and the box fell silent as everyone prepared their paddles. The hunt for the Jianyu had truly begun. Okay? Charles glanced over at his silent daughter, Estes. I've decided I want to start collecting some famous knives. Estes didn't even try to hide her excitement. Sure thing, just name your price. Charles gave her a cool nod. Fine by me. Chapter 309. Mermaid, 1,000,000 Baileys. With the auctioneer's final rap of the gavel, Estes claimed the double-edged sword for 4 billion Baileys. It was a staggering sum, far more than any ordinary blade should cost, but there was simply no alternative. Ever since the world's greatest swordsman made his name with the 7-star demon sword, demand for double-edged blades had exploded. Young nobles across the royal palace now wore them at their hips, driving prices through the roof. Charles stared in disbelief. He'd heard rumors of the price surge, but seeing it in action still stole his breath away. A bitter laugh escaped him. Well, I suppose that explains it. He caught Sargi's eye and gave a casual wave. Now that he understood the craze, this so-called star effect that enchanted each sword, he no longer fretted over the outrageous cost. Estes leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips as he cradled the newly won blade. By the time the next lot came around, any notable or high-speed sword on display was promptly snapped up by Estes. A murmur of resentment rippled through the gallery. Some of the lesser swordsmen glared with envy. It seemed that, in this contest at least, even unlimited wealth could not guarantee satisfaction. Charles leaned forward as murmurs rippled through the auction hall. What kind of patron do they have upstairs? They've snapped up every renowned blade, must be 200 or 300 million at least. Beneath the balcony, bidders squinted upward, eager to identify the mysterious buyer. Some other nobleman with a taste for fine weapons, one whispered. A sharply dressed man with slanted eyes caught those sly glances and let a cold smile curl his lips. No one dared speak aloud, but their contempt was palpable. Jewelry and celebrated daggers had already fetched fortunes. Now came the highlight all the city's elite awaited, the slave auction. As members of Shihai's 5 most powerful crime families, these nobles never missed the spectacle. A team of burly attendants wheeled in a massive cage draped in red cloth. From within came soft, desperate sobs, unmistakably human. Instantly, every merchant and aristocrat turned green with avarice. Their eyes flicked to one another, calculating price and profit. Charles, standing among them only to observe, felt a faint curve tug at his lips. The show had only just begun. Slaves had become a rare sight these days, especially in the New World. The trade never really left that one island, and outside interest had all but dried up. Charles understood why. It was a losing battle. No matter how many auctions were shut down, new captives would simply take their place. The promise of profit was too strong, too persistent to be beaten once and for all. Yet whenever Charles learned of a slave sale, he couldn't stay away. His usual easygoing smile would vanish, replaced by the unyielding determination of their captain. A hush would fall over the private auction room, as those around him felt his resolve settle in like a rising chill. Everyone glanced at Charles. They knew him well. He had made his reputation by striking decisively against the slave trade. In fact, it was his intervention in the New World that had, however briefly, brought the local traffic to a standstill. But that triumph was fleeting. The auctioneer's gavel cracked down on the podium. "Next lot," he bellowed. "A princess without a kingdom. Starting bid, 800 million. Beneath the glare of lanterns, a young woman appeared at the center of the room, cramped into an iron cage. Her petite frame trembled as she curled against the bars, eyes darting in search of any sign of mercy. Charles's heart pounded the moment the man in the iron cage caught sight of her. A fierce urge to protect this mysterious girl welled up inside him before he even realized what he was doing. 2 billion, he bellowed, slamming his paddle onto the stand. A hush fell over the auction hall. Every seasoned bidder paused, eyes sliding from Charles to the girl in the cage and back again. No on. He wanted to challenge such an audacious opening. The auctioneer cleared his throat, forcing a smile. 2 billion once. Silence. Until a deep voice from the back called out, 4 billion twice. Another hush. Then, just as the room began to murmur in disbelief, a third bidder leaned forward. 4.3 billion, third and final. Sold. The auctioneer's voice rang out, more relieved than triumphant. Congratulations to the distinguished guest of private room number 7. Charles didn't celebrate. He sank into his chair, eyes closed, knuckles tapping the armrest in a steady rhythm. Anyone who'd ever bid against him knew exactly what that meant. His mood was as dark as storm clouds, and the next auction, no matter how lofty the price, would be his to command. Charles had just concluded the sale of the 20 human slaves the auction house had lined up, and the hall buzzed with excitement. A hush fell as the auctioneer stepped forward again, wiping a sheen of nervous sweat from his brow. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, voice ringing through the chamber, "our next lot is so rare that even the merfolk of Marie Gioia's Tianlong clan would covet her. Please welcome our next and finest auction item." A great clamorous murmur rose from the crowd. Here in the Western Sea, the fame of the Tianlong merfolk was almost mythic. Owning one of their kind was the ultimate status symbol. With that promise of legend, attendants rolled out a giant glass tank on a wheeled platform. Then, through its shimmering walls, spectators beheld a smaller mermaid, her long hair the color of fresh blood, her tail shimmering with scarlet scales. Only her head and shoulders emerged from the water, and her wide eyes darted around the room in equal measures of fear and desperate hope. The auctioneer raised his hammer. Starting bid, 8,000 million Baileys. Minimum increment, 1,000 million Baileys. His words echoed, this was no ordinary sale. Would any bidder dare step up? A sudden voice broke the tension. From box 4 came a clear, confident shout, 500 million. Heads turned. A ripple of astonishment swept through the hall. Who was this young man, bidding so boldly well below the starting price? And what did he know that none of these seasoned merchants did? Charles leaned back in his seat, a faint smile playing on his lips. The auction was just beginning, and already it promised to be unforgettable. A tense hush fell over the auction hall as the bid came in. The stout, middle-aged man in Private Room 3 froze, his face paling. Nobody had expected someone to leap in with an offer that massive. In the adjacent booth, Charles, lean and composed, lifted his porcelain teacup and took a slow sip of his steaming black tea. Around him, the other bidders went on cleaning their weapons, refusing even to glance his way. "Who the hell do you think you are?" the middle-aged man finally barked. 20 million isn't going to scare me off. I'll go 25. At once, several other booths erupted with counterbids. They were furious at this mysterious competitor in room 4, some out of pride, some simply desperate to claim the prize on the block. In the West Sea, mermaids fetched extraordinary prices, far more than fishmen, who could still be hunted off Fishman Island just below the surface. It didn't take long for the bids to surge. 30 million, 35, 40, and then 45 million. Even at those heady figures, Charles remained impassive. He set his teacup back on the lacquered table, eyes drifting down to the creature shimmering in the display pool below. The mermaid's tail glinted like moonlight on water, and her wide eyes reflected both fear and curiosity. 1 billion, Charles said quietly. His voice cut through the roar of excitement like a blade. Silence snapped back into place as every bidder realized he'd just reset the entire auction with a single, staggering wager. Then Charles's composed voice cut through the cacophony as if it were a single note. In an instant, the raucous hall fell silent. Even the spectators in the private boxes stifled their chatter. 1 billion! What a staggering sum! You could buy countless farms and enslave countless souls, all for the sake of one mermaid. Shock rippled through the crowd, and more than one bidder stumbled back, stunned by the sheer extravagance. Chapter 310, The Potion. The auctioneer was positively dancing on his podium, his face flushed and his gavel quivering in his hand. This was, without question, the largest bid of his career. 1 billion, sold, he cried. He brought the gavel down with a thunderous rap. Congratulations to Room on securing this lot. A round of applause and cheers swept through the gallery. Charles lifted the cup of tea Tianyu had prepared for him and took a quiet sip, the corner of his mouth twitching into a satisfied smile. Outside the hall, Sergei, who'd been lurking just beyond the doors, was practically trembling with excitement. Landing such a powerful patron guaranteed him an invaluable cut of today's spoils. After hours of fierce competition, the auction was finally winding down. Only the most prized artifacts remained on the stage, and among them lay the very potion Charles had earlier withdrawn from his private case. True to his prediction, the next lot was presented, 10 slender vials, each filled with a shimmering, pale blue liquid. A murmur of bewilderment swept the room as bidders jostled one another, eager to speculate on the elixir's effects. Before the chatter could grow any louder, the auctioneer raised a hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "allow me to introduce this remarkable potion." The moment the auctioneer finished speaking, a hush fell over the grand hall. Noblewomen fidgeted beneath their silks, and silver-haired gentlemen leaned forward in their chairs, anxious, curious, yet unwilling to voice their doubts. At last, a soft murmur drifted through the rows. "They say this elixir can extend one's life, but how can we be sure it isn't a fraud?" In the private box above the crowd, Charles's hand tightened around the railing. His pulse quickened. The whole thing felt too good to be true. Still, he forced himself to remain calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer boomed, slapping a gauntlet-clad chest for emphasis, "you need only taste it to judge its power for yourselves. And mark my words, if you drink this potion and find it does nothing, our auction house will refund you 10 times the purchase price." A ripple of surprise ran through the audience. The bold guarantee stifled many objections, and murmurs of excitement replaced the earlier skepticism. Within moments, the auctioneer raised his mallet. "The first vial of the longevity elixir will open at 1 billion Baileys. Let the bidding begin." 3 billion Baileys. A silver-haired gentleman in the front row snapped up a numbered paddle. "Don't hold back on my account. Let me be the one to test its truth." Bidders exchanged wary glances. With the promise of a tenfold refund hanging in the air, each spectator weighed their own desire for immortality against the staggering price. And so the battle for that single, fabled vial began. The auctioneer watched with mounting excitement as the elderly gentleman climbed the stage steps. His grin froze the moment the final bid flashed on the board. 3 billion Baileys. 3 billion for a single vial of potion. This was insanity. Yet the old man wasted no time. He snatched the bottle from the auctioneer's outstretched hand and drank it in one gulp, driven by a fierce will to live. Even if the chance of success was slim, he would take it. At first, he merely puckered his lips at the faint sweetness. No other impression registered. He frowned, puzzled, but the crowd quickly realized something extraordinary was happening. Gray hairs began to flush with rosy hues, the creases in his skin smoothing before their eyes, and even his snowy white locks took on streaks of dark brown. In the space of a heartbeat, the old man looked easily 10 years younger. Nobles, merchants, and passing travelers gaped in astonishment. "He's transformed. He must be at least a decade younger," someone whispered. The old man staggered over to a mirror, trembling as he traced the lines that had just vanished. His eyes filled with disbelief and joy. Behind him, the auctioneer allowed himself a triumphant smile. The final bid might have fallen short of his wildest hopes, but the spectacle had been priceless, an advertisement more compelling than any flyer or proclamation. Charles stood at the edge of the auction hall, watching the faces of the 5 great family patriarchs light up with unmistakable greed. None of them had taken seriously the mysterious lot entrusted by the Rockefeller pirates. It was widely assumed to be nothing more than a health tonic, a mere gesture of goodwill. So they'd relegated it to the end of the sale, certain it would pass with little fanfare. Now, however, the room crackled with excitement. Patriarch Fedor lunged toward the elderly appraiser standing beside him. "You told us this was just a mild remedy," he barked. The appraiser, white-haired and trembling, could only mutter in disbelief. I never imagined its effects would be so powerful. Damn it all, once the gavel falls, we can't withdraw it. If we pull it now, the auction house's reputation goes down the drain." Across the hall, Luciano, head of one of the other great families, let go of his earlier hostility toward Fedor. He raised his hand, signaling sharply to his aides, "Be ready. No hesitation. This prize must belong to us." Fedor, in turn, barked orders to his own retinue. His eyes gleamed with the promise of victory. Then, with a thin smile, he addressed Luciano. "Master Luciano, surely at your young age you don't intend to outbid an old-timer like me?" Luciano returned the smile just as coolly and raised his hand again, rallying his men for the first round of bids. The auctioneer, sensing the tension, rapped his gavel and announced, "Lot 237, the Rockefeller tonic, now opening at 50,000. The crowd surged forward, paddles raised. Charles, heart-pounding, took a steadying breath. He knew he was watching history in the making. Whatever this elixir truly was, it had already broken every expectation, and the real battle for it was only just beginning. Charles watched with quiet amusement as Luciano leaned back, a mocking smile playing at his lips. "Everyone ages eventually, don't they?" he drawled. "Ha!" Fedor, standing nearby, clenched his fists. He offered no reply, but his eyes burned with barely contained fury. The pharmacist's miraculous elixir had driven the bidding into the stratosphere. Auctioneers called out the escalating figures. 5 billion Baileys. "Do I hear 8? 8 billion, now 9 billion. Fedor's brow furrowed. He recognized Luciano's proxy bidder elbowing him out again. In the end, Furto snapped up the first vial at 5 billion Baileys. Yet 8 more bottles remained on the block, each fetching between 2 and 6 billion. By the close of the sale, Charles had banked nearly 15 billion Baileys in one sweep, instantly recouping every penny he'd spent and then some. A soft chuckle escaped Charles. He lifted his glass of black tea in a casual toast, savoring the warm, bitter taste. Turning to Niken, his trusted pharmacist, he announced, "Niken, effective immediately, you're promoted to Chief Medical Officer of the Rockefeller Pirates. You'll oversee our entire pharmacopoeia, and I'm granting you officer status to match." Niken's eyes widened in disbelief, then brimmed with tears. She dropped to one knee, bowing deeply. "Thank you, Captain Charles," she cried, her voice quivering with gratitude. Charles offered a friendly nod. The auction had been a triumph, and with Niken at his side, his fleet's future looked brighter than ever. Charles felt a flush rise to his cheeks when Niken bent over to retrieve a fallen document. The unintended glimpse stirred something in him, and he squinted, embarrassed by his own reaction. He quickly averted his eyes. After all, he hardly knew Niken, and despite the man's boyish looks, he was almost 50. Charles wasn't interested. The auction's side event, the potion competition, had just concluded. As soon as the bidding closed, the winners snatched up their elixirs and departed without a second's hesitation. They refused to give would-be profiteers any opening. A few ice-appointed bidders lurking in the back row scowled, but said nothing. They'd learn to be smarter next time. With the mermaid statuette and the vials of rare potions sold off, the next lot needed no further introduction. Every eye in the hall turned to the auctioneer, who stood beside a small cart. A staff member rolled it forward, its surface draped in deep navy cloth. 3 identical wooden cases rested atop it. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called, voice rich with anticipation, "our final treasure of the evening, the fabled devil fruit." He lifted one case's latch and swung open the lid. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Nested in crimson velvet lay a peculiar banana, its pale yellow skin etched with swirling ebony patterns. Murmurs rippled through the hall. This was more than mere fruit. It was a legend, a secret of the sea that could grant unimaginable power to whoever dared taste it. Bidders leaned forward, hearts pounding. The real auction was about to begin. "I'm sure you all recognize this." The auctioneer wasted no time stoking their curiosity. "Enough small talk. You came for the devil fruit we advertised, so tell us which one it is, and then place your bids." A hush fell over the crowd as every eye locked onto the strange fruit displayed in the center of the platform. Chapter 311, Devil Fruit Auction. I stood in the cavernous auction hall, the air thick with anticipation and the clatter of cups and coins. As the crowd's murmurs swelled around me, the auctioneer raised his gavel and called the room to order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "we have 3 devil fruits tonight. 2 known varieties, and 1 complete mystery." A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators. Charles, leaned forward as he produced a lacquered box and slid its lid open, revealing the first of the 3 prized items. Nestled in black velvet lay a curious banana-shaped fruit, pale gray and white, its smooth skin etched with inky black patterns. "Lot number 28, the auctioneer announced with a flourish, the beast fruit, in Japanese, Inu Inu no Mi. Model, Gray Wolf. This devil fruit grants you the power to transform into a fearsome gray wolf. Starting bid, 100 million berries." A murmur of disbelief ran through the hall. In an instant, a rugged pirate in the front row sprang to his feet. 160 million, he roared. Bidding shot skyward. I watched hardened sea dogs exchange calculating glances. Every seasoned hunter knew the value of a model variant. Rarely did such a devil fruit appear at auction. Most were devoured the moment they surfaced. Tonight, fortune and glory dangled within reach of the highest bidder. As the price climbed and the crowd's fervor grew, I pressed my hand against the velvet-lined rail. This was no ordinary auction. With each successive bid, the stakes rose. To claim the gray wolf fruit would mean unrivaled power and one step closer to weaving my own legend on the grand line. It didn't matter if you lost. Only the most ambitious would dare to pursue a devil fruit's power. The atmosphere in the auction hall crackled with excitement as bidders pushed the price past 1 billion berries in mere moments. After all, devil fruits were nearly impossible to find, and the gray wolf fruit promised a terrifyingly potent ability. 3 billion, a deep voice boomed from the back row. The hall fell silent. At that sum, most contenders bowed out. Few could or would raise their bids any higher. The man who'd spoken leaned back in his chair, his wolf-shaped mask gleaming under the lights. No one dared approach. "It's the Wolf King pirates," someone murmured. "Captain Allison himself." Those who knew the pirate lord exchanged uneasy glances. Captain Allison was infamous in the West Blue, a devil fruit user whose wolf form and vicious tactics had left countless ships in ruins. Even the Navy officers in attendance frowned, but none dared challenge his presence here. This auction house answered to a far more powerful authority. "Don't worry, Zog," the masked bidder rumbled quietly to his companion at his side. "I'll secure it for you." He folded his arms, waiting confidently as the auctioneer rapped the gavel. 3 billion berries is on the table. Do I hear 3.2? From now on, you'll be the second wolf of our Wolf King pirates, Allison declared to the man at his left. "Thank you, brother," Zog replied eagerly, breaking into a foolish laugh. Sensing the bidding had stalled, the auctioneer brought down his gavel. 310 million Baileys, a quiet voice answered from box 4. 2,000 million Baileys. The moment Charles revealed himself, pandemonium swept the hall. "Box number 5,000's packed with high-grade stock," someone shouted. "When I first saw it listed, it was only million. I didn't catch it at the last medicine auction. I thought they'd run out of funds. Turns out they've got bottomless pockets." The roar of excitement rose to a fever pitch. Allison, the self-styled Wolf King, narrowed his eyes and stared at the fourth box as if he could see right through its wood. 6,000 million Baileys. No sooner had he spoken than another bid rang out. 400 million Baileys. Charles's calm reply cut through the clamor like a blade. Around them, the tension was electric, but for Charles, the stakes were far more than just numbers. His real reason for photographing this devil fruit had nothing to do with Caesar Courant's synthetic devil fruit experiments. Those projects gulped down countless fruits for their twisted research. Charles's motive lay elsewhere entirely. Charles stared at the empty display case in disbelief. All 3 of the rare devil fruits he'd been tracking were gone, snatched up right before he could even bid. It was maddening. He'd spent weeks scouring the docks for any clue, only to come away with nothing but worthless junk. Now, here he was, clutching a handful of berries and a handful of regrets. Behind him, Zog the pirate lord chuckled. "If you've got the money, kid, I'm all ears. If you don't..." He spread his hands with a shrug. "Tough luck." Under his fearsome reputation, even the island's toughest thugs wouldn't dare cross him. Allison's face went pale. 3 million berries is already more than most pirates could dream of, she whispered. And now the prices skyrocketed to, well, more than we have. She glanced at Charles, her eyes wide. "Brother, let's give up on this one. I promise I'll snag you the next devil fruit I find." Charles ground his teeth. He hated backing down, but Allison had a point. The price was simply out of reach. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "Let it go." Zog merely shrugged and flashed a crooked grin. "No big deal. Plenty more fruits out there. Let's move on and see what else we can dig up." And with that, the 3 of them turned away from the empty case, determined to press on in search of the next opportunity, whatever it might be. Allison couldn't help but grin at the bewildered look on his younger brother's face. With no further bids, the auctioneer let his gavel fall decisively. "Sold! Lot 4 goes to." He glanced down at his notes, then raised his voice. "Congratulations to our Wolf King." He turned to introduce the next item and produced another devil fruit. This one shaped like an elongated banana, its yellow skin streaked with inky black veins. Up now, the penultimate lot, the zoology polar bear fruit. Opening bid, 200 million Baileys. A ripple of excitement swept through the crowd as paddles shot into the air. Bidding climbed swiftly, 250, 300, until Allison's paddle reappeared, firm and unshakable. He nodded to himself, certain this prize was his. But before the hammer could fall, a familiar, challenging voice rang out. 400 million. Charles slammed his paddle down. The gavel pounded so hard the table trembled. A crystal glass toppled from Allison's side, shattering in a spray of fragments. Hot anger flared in Allison's eyes as he shot Charles a furious glare. Seriously? After I already snagged one devil fruit, you're going to swoop in and steal this too? Do you think you're too rich for the rest of us? Allison snarled, slamming his fist on the bidding table. Every time he tried to place a bid, the price leapt higher, precisely at his expense. Charles sensed the tension, even before glancing over. Allison's fury radiated across the room. Barrett, standing beside Charles, bristled with the urge to step forward and confront him directly. Charles laid a calming hand on Barrett's arm. "Relax," Charles said quietly. "We'll stick to our strategy." At that, Barrett froze, and the other bidders exchanged uneasy looks while stealing furtive glances at Allison. The older man's glare could have cut steel, but no one dared challenge him. Finally, Allison's impatience boiled over. "Sir," he barked at the auctioneer, "abide by your own rules. The highest bid wins. That's always been the case. My bid on box 4 stands, fair and square." The auctioneer raised his gavel and rapped it once against the wood. His voice remained cool and unwavering. "The house rules are clear, Mr. Allison. The lot goes to the highest bidder." Allison's face flushed a deeper red, but he had no ground on which to protest. With a disgruntled snort, he sank back into his chair. Zog, his younger brother, leaned in eagerly, eyes glinting. "Should I teach them a lesson?" Zog offered, barely containing his smirk. Charles shot Zog a firm look. "No," he said softly but decisively. "Let the auction speak for itself. If you dare to challenge me, no one will ever leave Kedon Island alive." Allison had no intention of arguing about the rules right now. She would wait until the auction ended, and then she'd act. As the auctioneer's gavel came down, Charles allowed himself a satisfied grin. He had just claimed yet another devil fruit. Chapter 312, Devil Fruit Auction. "Ha! We're almost at the finish line," the auctioneer bellowed, flashing a broad smile as he surveyed the room. "Only one lot remains, so I'll keep this brief." His eyes darted toward the 4th crate at his side. "This final item is a devil fruit. No name, no description. We have no record of its powers. You'll only discover what it can do once you own it. Think of it as the ultimate gamble. Bidding opens at million berries." A subdued murmur rippled through the hall. The starting price was unchanged, but the earlier fervor had faded. After all, who would risk hundreds of millions on an unknown devil fruit? And every eye turned expectantly toward the balcony, waiting for the mysterious high roller. Rumor had it he was richer than anyone dared imagine. The auctioneer wiped his brow and cleared his throat. "Who will make the first bid?" he called out, his voice echoing through the tense silence. Charles leaned forward in his seat, eyes fixed on the last lot. A perfectly round, pale green fruit streaked with jet-black veins. The auctioneer paused, then tapped his gavel. "This is our final item," he reminded the hushed hall. "We've already shattered all previous sales records tonight, but who's ready to make this one the crowning achievement?" He swept his gaze over the rows of bidders. Silence. Just as he was about to lower the hammer, a low chuckle drifted down from box number 7. A clear, calm voice rang out. 1 billion Baileys. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The auctioneer allowed himself a broad smile. He leaned into the microphone. 1.1 billion, going once. His tone ignited the crowd. Paddle after paddle shot into the air. 160 million, 170, 200. Enthusiasm swelled as new bidders joined the fray, each determined to outdo the last. Charles watched the green and black fruit as the numbers climbed. In his mind, he rifled through his devil fruit handbook. He knew he hadn't memorized every variety, but certain shapes and patterns stuck with him. This one, its smooth, melon-like curves marbled with those distinctive dark veins, matched a description he'd studied days ago. A sudden jolt of excitement ran through him. If his memory served, this wasn't an ordinary gourd-like fruit. It was said to grant its eater a power unlike any he'd encountered before. As the bids soared ever higher, Charles's heart raced. He had to secure this devil fruit, no matter the cost. Charles sat forward in his seat as the final lot was unveiled. A devil fruit said to repel anything in its vicinity, an eerie power that immediately reminded him of Bartholomew Bear's meatball fruit. The two fruits shared a strange kinship in their repulsive properties. And without hesitation, Charles raised his paddle. 200 million berries, he called out. A ripple of shock ran through the auction hall. The last bid had been 5 million. Charles's jump to 200 million stunned everyone, Box 1's occupants included. When the number appeared on the giant screen beside Lot 30 and Box 8, every would-be bidder silently lowered their paddles. Who in their right mind would challenge a bid of that size for a little-known devil fruit? An expectant hush fell over the room. The auctioneer, aware that no counteroffer was coming, launched straight into the final countdown. Going once, going twice, sold. With the hammer's echo, the day's proceedings came to an end. From 9 a.m. until just after 5:30 p.m., 30 lots had changed hands under the watchful eyes of countless spectators. Now, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the auctioneer beamed. Let's congratulate the honored guest in Box 8, Mr. Charles, on winning the final lot. Let's give ourselves a round of applause, the auctioneer urged, but only scattered claps echoed through the hall. His forced smile betrayed his embarrassment as dozens of buyers exchanged uneasy glances toward Private Room No. In their eyes glimmered envy and disbelief. A quick mental tally revealed why. The occupant had just snapped up at least a quarter of the auction house's offerings for a staggering 25 billion credits. No one dared challenge Charles here on Kaido Island. This was the sovereign turf of West Sea's 5 major crime families, a battlefield no outsider would risk. Even the pirates who prowled these waters relied on the gangs to fence their stolen goods and provide safe passage. In the West Sea, syndicates and sea rovers coexisted in a tense but necessary alliance. As the hall emptied, most patrons slipped away to regroup or to pool resources against Charles, while others headed backstage to settle their accounts and collect their purchases. Barrett gathered a hefty pouch of credits and fell into step behind Sergei, both slipping quietly into the humid night beyond the auction house doors. Charles had no intention of paying. After all, he hadn't insulted anyone, so there was no reason to make a fuss. "I'm not part of the Golden Lion Brigade," he said coolly. "I don't answer to their rules. I'm perfectly civil, as long as you don't bother me." Barrett, the towering figure 5 meters tall in an immaculate military uniform, strode forward to settle the account. His sheer presence exuded authority, and everyone in the hall backed away to give him room. Barrett set the payment box on the counter. "How much do I owe?" he asked. The cashier swallowed hard under Barrett's intense gaze. "Sir, the total comes to 23 billion credits. If you want to eliminate the odd surcharge, it's 500 billion. Without a word, Barrett opened the box and counted out 23 billion credits. The cashier's face went pale. "No, wait. You only need to pay 13 billion. We've already converted the remaining 15 billion worth of Baileys into potions. 10 vials are valued at 14 billion, and at the 9,000 to 1 exchange rate, that leaves a balance of just 15 billion. Please, that's the final amount." Barrett didn't hesitate. He counted out 13 billion Baileys, handed the stack to the attendant, then signaled his men. In a flash, they swept through the auction hall and reclaimed every lot they'd just sold. Sergei swallowed hard as he watched them move. "Be careful on the way back," he warned Barrett quietly. "Those at the auction house have noticed us by now. But don't worry, they won't dare make a move while we're still on the island." Sergei fell into step beside Barrett. The pirate captain gave him a hard look. Sergei ducked his head. "Thank you for the warning," he said. "The Rockefeller pirates won't forget this." With a dismissive nod, Barrett turned and led his men back toward the private chambers. One of the auction hosts called after them with a mocking smile. "Plotting against us, are you? Let's see who ends up the hunter and who becomes the prey." Inside the room, Charles sank into a velvet-upholstered chair, swirling a glass of red wine. He paid the taunt no mind. Instead, he surveyed his companions. 4 girls clustered near the hearth, and the 2 small, cloaked figures he'd nicknamed his little phantoms. "Rest up tonight," he said softly. "You've all earned it. At first light, once our supplies are ready, we set sail again." The room fell quiet, the tension easing as his crew allowed themselves a rare moment of peace before the next storm. Charles looked around at the girls and urged, "If you're going out for a walk, be sure to take someone with you. I don't want anyone dashing off alone." Chapter 313, Frozen Sea. All through the night, nothing happened. The hidden adversaries on Kaido Island dared not make a move, perhaps deterred by the formidable forces Charles had brought with him. As a result, Charles and his companions were able to rest peacefully one more night. Early the next morning, Barrett emerged from below decks, portfolio in hand. "Captain, I've inventoried all our supplies," he reported, "and thanks to Sargay's help, nothing's been left behind." Charles gave a curt nod. "Excellent. Now that we're ready, let's get underway." They had stayed on Kaido Island for 2 days, replenishing supplies and regrouping. But it was time to move on. Barrett signaled the crew, and men and women heaved provisions aboard. Charles helped his wife and children into their cabin before climbing up to the deck himself. Just as the last crate was stowed, Barrett approached once more. "Captain, Sergei warns that many eyes are watching us. None dared attack while we were on Kaido Island, but now that we're heading out to sea, they may strike. Rumor has it there's a sizable force waiting to ambush us." Charles glanced at the horizon, where dawn's pale light shimmered off a glassy expanse of water, the so-called frozen sea. He straightened his shoulders. "Let them come," he said quietly. "They'll find we're no easy prey." Barrett cracked a half-smile. "Aye, they're nothing but jumped-up clowns, Captain. They won't know what hit them." With that, Charles gave the order, and the ship slipped its moorings. Oared boats fell back, and the mainsails caught the rising wind. As they cleared the island's harbor, every man and woman on deck stood ready. Ahead lay the frozen sea, an empty stretch of ocean where dangers hid beneath the calm surface. But Charles was determined. Whatever lay in wait, they would face it together. Charles reclined in the captain's chair, perched high on the quarterdeck, his cold eyes fixed on the endless horizon. "When the time comes," he said, addressing Barrett, "you will lead our young fighters into battle. I will remain here." Barrett bowed crisply. "Yes, Captain." Behind him, Estes and Caesar fell into step, followed by Logan Phillip and the dozen children who had awakened devil fruit abilities. At Barrett's signal, over 100 swordsmen silently took their positions, weapons at the ready. From a penniless cabin boy to the commander of nearly 10,000 souls in just 12 years, Charles Rockefeller had forged his legacy on the high seas. Now, on the eve of battle, that legacy would blaze brightest. A ruthless light ignited in his gaze. "Let their blood feed the glory of the Rockefeller name," he whispered, lifting a goblet of deep red wine. The dying sun cast a blood-like sheen across the waters below, as if the sea itself anticipated the coming carnage. Then the ship's siren wailed, a summons to war. Crewmen sprang into action, each hand gripping sword or musket. The deck hummed with tense anticipation. Charles set his wine aside, his voice slicing through the clamor. "Report. A huge fleet of pirate and unknown armed ships has been spotted ahead." The lookout's urgent cry crackled over the communicator. Moments later, crewmen poured onto the deck, eyes fixed on the distant silhouettes. At first, they were little more than inky dots on the horizon. Now the countless prows and billowing sails were growing larger by the minute. Estesh's heart pounded as the intelligence officer called out each notorious crew: West Sea Wolf King pirates, Big Bear pirates, Broadsword pirates, Burst pirates, Skull Crusher pirates. His voice faltered when he finished. Hundreds of enemy vessels, far more than anyone had expected. A cold sweat broke out on Estesh's brow. "Are they insane?" "Quiet!" Caesar snapped, his voice low but fierce. "Father is watching us from above. This is our test." Estes, the eldest sister, stepped to the rail. Her steel-gray eyes gleamed with determination as she assessed the oncoming armada. Robert and the other siblings stiffened, swallowing down their fear. "Alcar, V out an opening," Estes announced. "Follow my lead. Do not stray, and do not act recklessly. Caesar, stay alert, protect our younger brothers and sisters, and adapt to whatever happens." With her orders given, Estes turned to face the mounting threat. Sails snapped in the rising wind as the pirate fleet closed the distance. The crew braced for battle, hearts steeled by their eldest sister's command. Ahead lay chaos and conflict, and only the strong would see this day through. Charles stood back, watching with satisfaction as every pirate in his fleet tightened their grips on swords and cutlasses. The resolute gleam in their eyes told him they were ready, and that restraint had been perfect. He allowed himself a small, pleased smile. This, he knew, was only the beginning. On the horizon rose a colossal vessel, its dark hull cutting through the waves like a leviathan. From the bow of the Wolf King pirate's flagship, Allison the Wolf King stepped forward, bearing a predatory grin. "By the teeth of the sea," he growled. "That's one fine ship. Some nobleman must be out on patrol, but that prize will be ours." The Big Bear pirates, who sailed in loose alliance with the Wolf Kings, thundered their agreement. "Easy, Allison. You can't just call dibs. We've got as much right to that ship as you do." Not to be outdone, the broadsword pirate's captain spun his blade with a lazy flourish. "Let them squabble over the hull," he said with a chuckle. "I'm more interested in the pretty young ladies aboard." From a nearby deck came another voice. Cool, amused. The burst pirate's captain leaned on the rail, inspecting the prize ship as if it were an old acquaintance. "You know," he mused, "that vessel looks strangely familiar. I could swear I've crossed paths with her before." Even merchant and privateer crews, normally content to steer clear of outright piracy, fell silent at the sight. Every captain on the surrounding ships nursed his own secret agenda, but all eyes remained fixed on the same target. Charles inhaled the sharp tang of salt and sea spray. He glanced at his lieutenants, each poised, each ready to strike. Then he raised his voice, firm and clear. "All right," he called. "Every ship prepare to board. This prize is ours for the taking." Below deck, drums began to beat, and the clatter of chains echoed as grappling hooks flew. The calm before the storm had passed. Now, the real battle for the grand ship and the fortunes it held was about to begin. "Don't fire. This is our future flagship," Allison shouted, brandishing his saber. Behind him, a squad of pirates let out eerie howls as they prepared to board the ship. From the deck, Charles watched the pirates advance. He glanced at Allison, then shifted his weight and launched himself forward. With each light step on the water's surface, a crystalline layer of ice formed beneath his boots, creating a glimmering path across the waves. The pirate captains, charging headlong toward the vessel, skidded to a halt. Their eyes widened in disbelief at the lone young man walking atop the sea. A cold aura began to emanate from Charles, frost cracking the air around him. He drew his sword in one fluid motion, the blade catching the dying light. Raising it high, he bellowed, "By the glory of the Rockefeller name, I command your surrender. Freeze." A pale blue energy rippled out from Charles in all directions. Wherever the glow touched, the sea went still, as though time itself had stopped. Within seconds, the water between the two ships solidified into a flawless sheet of ice, locking the pirate vessels in place and sealing their fate. Chapter 7. Icebound. A sheet of ice spread for kilometers in every direction, encasing the Wolf King pirates' fleet in a frozen tomb. Their flagship ground to a halt, sending sailors sprawling across the deck as the emergency brakes engaged. Cries of alarm rang out. What happened here?" Crewmen staggered to their feet and peered over the rail. The churning sea had solidified into an unbroken plain of glassy blue-white ice. "It's complete, live frozen." Panic rippled through the pirate ranks. Every ship lay trapped. There was no route of escape. At the center of it all stood Estes, his face suddenly ashen. He just unleashed his devil fruit ability at full power for the first time, and the recoil had cost him dearly. A wave of exhaustion washed over him. Half his strength seemed to drain away in an instant, his legs nearly giving out. He steadied himself on the hilt of his sword and turned to face the nearest pirate officer, barely 30 meters away, his blade still gleaming. One by one, Estes's comrades leapt from the deck, landing on the frozen sea behind him in perfect formation. Boots crunched against the ice, the only sound cutting through the winter air. Caesar crouched down, testing the surface with a firm stomp. He straightened with a cocky grin. "I've got to hand it to our mysterious benefactor," he called out, voice booming across the ice. "This stuff is surprisingly sturdy." His attempted humor hung in the frigid silence of the Wolf King pirates. Not a single one cracked a smile. Chapter 314, The Battle of the Rockefeller Family. Barrett planted himself firmly at Esdeth's side and laid a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You're too wounded to keep fighting. Fall back." Esdeth's eyes flared defiantly. She shook off his hand. "No, I can still fight." Barrett opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, a sudden commotion broke out nearby. Dozens of ragtag pirate crews, terrified and scrambling in the chaos, spotted a small group of children making their way down onto the frozen sea. A grizzled buccaneer spat curses and rallied his comrades. "Get those brats! Seize them! And we'll split the treasure!" At that moment, Allison sprang from the deck of their ship, pointing directly at the intruders. Zog leaped after him without hesitation. The ice beneath their feet creaked and heaved in thick, rolling sheets. Within seconds, hundreds of meters of frozen expanse were blanketed with pirates and bystanders alike, all pouring onto the ice in pursuit. Those who lacked footing were forced to stay on their vessels, helpless to intervene. Caesar let out a roar to rally the Rockefeller pirates. "Show them our might!" In an instant he shifted form, scales rippling, jaws distending, into a towering humanoid tyrannosaurian beast. In his massive claws, he brandished a gargantuan spiked mace, forged to fit his colossal frame. The ice trembled under his advance. Barrett and Esdeath exchanged a quick glance. Their allies were vastly outnumbered, but retreat was no longer an option. With a nod, they braced themselves. The Battle of the Rockefeller family was about to begin. Charles surveyed his younger brother Caesar with a thoughtful look. Caesar had always dreamed of wielding a sword like their father, but after countless practice sessions, he discovered that blade work simply wasn't his strength. He lacked the finesse and footwork required. What he had in abundance was raw power. Heavy weapons suited him far better. That evening, Charles set to work in the forge. By dawn, he presented Caesar with a beautifully crafted Hailu stone mace. It was modeled after Kaido's fearsome warhammer, but scaled down for Caesar's frame. The long, polished shaft fit comfortably in his grip, and the head of the mace pulsed faintly with embedded Hailu veins. Caesar beamed with pride. When the time came to storm the Skull Crusher pirate stronghold, Caesar led the charge. Tesla and Robert flanked him, while Estes fell in beside their youngest siblings, shielding them from harm. Charles had intended for Estes to spearhead the assault with Caesar as his rear guard. Now the order was reversed, and Estes bore the burden of guarding everyone else. "Charge!" Caesar roared, swinging his mace in a blur. He crashed through the enemy ranks like a battering ram. Where he passed, no pirate stood to challenge him. Bones cracked under the Hailu's weight, armor splintered, and the ground shuddered with each blow. The captain of the Skull Crusher pirates, a hulking brute with a jagged club, finally lunged forward. "Ha! If you want to fight, brother Caesar, you'll have to get through me first," he bellowed, raising his club for a smashing downward strike. Before the blow could land, Didara darted in front of Caesar. Explosive impact! She thrust her fist forward, a crackling sphere of compressed air forming at her knuckles. The captain's eyes widened in shock, and then she smashed him off his feet, sending him skidding across the cobblestones in a whirlwind of dust. With their leader down, the remaining Skull Crushers faltered. Around them, Charles and Estes pressed in, turning the tide decisively. And at the center of it all stood Caesar, gripping his new Hailu stone mace, every bit the powerhouse he'd always meant to be. Charles's punch struck the captain of the Skull Crusher pirates like a cannon shot, sending him hurtling across the frozen deck. He crashed against the railing with a bone-shaking thud, then tumbled into the icy sea below. "What devil fruit, user?" the captain spluttered, blood flecking his lips. Charles advanced, fists still crackling with explosive energy. "You want more explosions? I'll give you exactly that," he warned, voice calm but deadly. A desperate terror seized the captain. No, please don't come any closer," he begged, scrambling backward. But Charles was already too close. With a single clench of his fist, he unleashed a devastating blast of controlled explosion. The deck shattered beneath the pirate's feet, splinters of ice spraying outward. A final, strangled scream echoed as the captain vanished beneath the waves. Breathing heavily, Charles surveyed the aftermath. The entire ice field was splattered crimson. Screams rose and fell in the distance where his comrades had fought. Limbs and shattered weapons littered the battlefield, painting a grisly tableau in the fading light. Just as Charles stood over the last of the downed pirates, a new figure strode forward, Robert, famed for his unshakable courage. Mist swirled at his feet, coalescing into a living cloud of vapor. With the power of the natural gas fruit, Robert had become a being of pure gas, intangible, unstoppable. Bullets met his form and simply passed through, clattering harmlessly onto the deck. Raising his hand, Robert unleashed a searing burst of vapor that swept the surviving pirates off their feet, sending them screaming into the churning waters. Together, Charles and Robert stood victorious amid the wreckage. The Skull Crusher pirates lay defeated on the ice, their threat extinguished by two young men whose devil fruit powers had turned the tide in an instant. Robert suddenly dissolved into a haze of iridescent gas, slithering through the ranks of enemies. Within seconds, anyone caught in its embrace was choking, their screams cut short as they collapsed soundlessly. Soldiers nearby froze in disbelief. How could such a thing happen? "Cover your mouths! Hold your breath!" Someone shouted, but the warning came too late. Warriors clutched at their throats in panic, gasping futilely for air before dropping to the ground, lifeless. Amid the carnage, Sif, an elemental snow fruit user, shifted into living ice. Her form crackled with frost as she skated across the battlefield in shimmering shards. Yet despite her agility, her attacks lacked the devastating power of Robert's lethal gas. All she could manage was a frosty barrier that deflected incoming blows, helpless to strike back. Frustration tore through the attackers like wildfire. Again and again, they pressed their advantage, only to see swords and crossbow bolts glance harmlessly off Sif's icy defenses. Despair settled over them. No matter how fiercely they fought, they could neither harm the girl nor halt Robert's deadly transformation. Chaos reigned. Smoke mingled with the bitter cold of Sif's ice, and somewhere nearby the clash of steel rang out against cries of terror. Dozens lay dead or writhing on the ground in agony, the wounded too disoriented to flee or fight. "Brother!" Zog's voice cut through the tumult as he spotted Allison hurled across the field by a single, crushing blow. He raced forward, eyes blazing with fury. "You," he snarled, groping for words as rage flooded him. "How dare you lay a hand on my brother? Prepare to die!" Zog bellowed, hefting his enormous mace. The weapon was identical to the one Caesar wielded. With a thunderous clang, the two maces crashed together, sending a shockwave of ringing metal through the air. Caesar's brow furrowed as he realized this hulking oaf was even stronger than the man he had just dispatched, no opponent to be underestimated. He squared his shoulders and met Zog's assault with every ounce of his skill. Meanwhile, Allison, still reeling from being hurled across the room, scrambled to his feet and charged at Caesar, claws bared. Before he could close the distance, a figure in white stepped into his path, a gleaming Western-style sword poised in a graceful sweep. "Your fight is with me," the newcomer declared. In one fluid motion, the sword flashed in the light. Allison, caught off guard, couldn't dodge fast enough. The blade sliced across his chest. He snarled in pain, blood trickling from the wound. "Asshole!" Red fury ignited in Allison's eyes. His form hulking and contorting, he burst into his werewolf shape, fur bristling, claws extending. "Oh, a devil fruit user as well," the swordsman murmured, his tone amused. With a swift flick of his foot, he sent a razor-sharp, flower-shaped blade spinning from the tip of his sword's hilt. The petals of steel pinioned the injured long sword against the floor, holding it fast. Allison froze, the crimson wound across his chest trickling coldly through his lupine fur as the swordsman advanced with calm confidence, and the battle for their lives raged on around them. The two sides clashed fiercely, but overall, Allison was being driven back and battered. Had it not been for Esdeath's timely use of her devil fruit power, Allison would already have fallen. The battlefield shifted constantly under the barrage of cannon fire and clashing blades. Barrett surveyed the chaos, then swung his massive fist in a single thunderous arc. A reckless pirate captain went flying, crashing into a ruined mast. Barrett wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and growled, "This is getting out of hand." From every angle, enemy officers opened fire. Bullets hissed past Barrett, but he barely blinked. His eyes swept the lines and froze on a desperate scene. Eve, Kakarot, Logan, and Trunks were being pressed back by a swarming detachment of pirates. Only the devil fruit users, Sif, Julie, Philip, and Gilbert, were holding the line, and even they were straining under the onslaught. If their strength gave out, the little band risked being annihilated. Without hesitation, Barrett charged through the hail of musket shots. He reached Eve and the others just as the pirates lunged forward, and with one earth-shaking punch, he sent the attackers sprawling like skittled pins. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then Eve let out a relieved laugh. "Thank you, Barrett," she called, rushing forward to clasp his hand. Around her, the others piled on with their gratitude, their battered spirits lifted by Barrett's timely intervention. "Stay safe out there," Barrett warned the children. "There are too many enemies around. Watch your backs and don't wander off." All at once, gunfire cracked across the battlefield. A few of the little ghosts stumbled and fell, already nursing wounds from the onslaught. Chapter 315, Seize the Spoils. "Ha! I'm spent, now it's my turn." Caesar hoisted his massive iron mace and swung it in a wide arc, driving it down onto Zog's helmeted skull. Crack! The crushing blow echoed across the frozen battleground. Zog staggered, blood streaming from a shattered visor, his eyes rolling back. "Brother," he gasped. Allison seized the moment. Sword raised, he lunged at the fallen werewolf. "How dare you lose focus mid-battle? Taste death!" But before his blade could strike, Esdeath's cobalt eyes narrowed to slits. A sudden chill crackled in the air, her aura flaring like a winter storm. Allison's grip faltered, dread flooding his heart, and in that instant, Esdeath was upon him. Lightning fast, she slashed through armor and bone. A geyser of blood sprayed across the ice as Allison's head rolled free. "Captain!" The cry went up in stunned horror. Around them, the enemy ranks dissolved into chaos. Witnessing the decapitation of their leader, men dropped weapons, terror etched on their faces. No one dared stand their ground. "Board the ships," someone shouted. Too late. Only a few heard. Instead of fleeing, a handful of survivors scrambled to shatter the thick ice underfoot, hoping to stall pursuit by sending chunks of frozen sea crashing into the waves. But the rest scattered, screaming, every last one intent only on escape. The spoils of war lay abandoned in the snow, their owners too frightened even to claim them. A hulking figure nearly 4 meters tall burst onto the ice, Gothic robes swirling around him as he slashed at the frozen surface. Despite his enormous frame, his face was that of an unseasoned child, no more than 10 years old, making him stand out sharply among the fleeing crew. A small band of boys his age scurried to keep pace. "Maria, what do we do? The captain's dead, and the enemy's right on our heels," one of them cried. The other sailors, panic written across their faces, could barely steady their knives. Maria barked without hesitation. "Quiet, keep hacking that ice, or they'll be on us in seconds." In his young arms, he wielded a sword so massive it dwarfed the men beside him. Though he would one day be known as Moonlight Maria, one of the next generation's Shichibukai, today he was just an 11 or 12-year-old boy, his features still round and unlined. Sweat beaded on his brow as he hacked again, teeth clenched with determination. "Come on, keep at it!" Encouraged by his urgency, the others redoubled their efforts. Fortunately, their ship lay just offshore, and within moments they'd hacked a narrow channel through the ice. "Board quickly. We don't have a moment to lose." With a final heave, Maria leapt onto the deck and shouted for the rest to follow. Within seconds, the battered crew was scrambling aboard, the frozen wasteland disappearing behind them as they set sail for safety. Captain Charles stared at the ice floe as the last of the stranded pirates called out to him. Around him, the crew clamored in relief and frustration. Relief that they'd found a seaworthy ship. Frustration that there simply wasn't enough room on board. "Captain, we need to leave now, or Caesar's fleet will be upon us in minutes," one sailor shouted, voice cracking with panic. Charles wiped frost from his brow and surveyed the frozen wasteland. Dozens more faces pressed against the edge of the ice, all pleading for a berth on the vessel. At most, the boat could safely carry 60 people. Any more, and its speed, and their chance of escape would vanish. "Even if we tried to take them," the quartermaster added grimly, "the extra weight would slow us down. Caesar's ships are fast. They'd overtake us for sure." The stranded pirates beat their fists on the ice, roaring their desperation. Charles closed his eyes for a heartbeat, fighting the lump in his throat. He knew what had to be done. "All right," he shouted, voice ringing over the wind. "Full sail! Get us clear of here." Crewmen leapt to action, hauling ropes, trimming the sails, and easing the rudder. The ship groaned as it lurched forward, carving a path through the frigid water. Behind them, the howling wind carried one final cry from the ice. "You bastard! I haven't even boarded yet!" Charles set his jaw and stared back at the vanishing silhouettes. Guilt and resolution warred in his chest, but he wouldn't trade the safety of the many for the few. With the ship surging ahead, He turned his gaze to the horizon, one step closer to freedom, and one painful choice made. Damn, Moria! I shouldn't have begged the captain to let you on board. A dozen frustrated pirates shouted after the departing ship, but their curses died on the wind. In an instant, Caesar's men surged forward and hemmed them in. Caesar himself stepped to the front, lips curled in a savage grin. Nowhere to run, he declared. Brother, one vessel is getting away. Gilberta cried, pointing at a lone ship dwindling to a dark speck on the horizon. Caesar's grin snapped into a snarl. Then kill them all. Leave no one alive. At his command, the trapped pirates panicked. They huddled together, hopelessly outnumbered, and were slaughtered without mercy. Only Moria and a handful of his crew managed to break free and flee. With the last of the resistance wiped out, Caesar and his men climbed back aboard their ship and made their way to Charles. On deck, Charles stood motionless, staring at the ragged line of children before him, each one bruised, bleeding, terrified. The silence pressed down on them so heavily that no one dared meet his eyes. Only Caesar and Estes lifted their heads to look at their father. Charles surveyed his crew from the quarterdeck, noticing Caesar's cold, unreadable stare and Esdeth's impassive expression, his uniform spattered with blood in gruesome streaks. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Charles cleared his throat. I don't need to praise or condemn today's fight. You all know how well you performed. From now on, I expect everyone to follow the training schedule I've laid out. If anyone dares to slack off, you'll find yourselves lashed to the mizzenmast until you learn to pull your weight. A chorus of "Yes, Captain" rose from the crew, heads bobbing in agreement. Charles pressed on, eyes sharp. Aside from Caesar and Esdeth, no one else stood out today. Robert and Deidara did well at first. They each took down a captain, but they pushed themselves too far and collapsed from exhaustion. If Barrett hadn't intervened, they'd be lucky to be alive now. Individual skill means little without teamwork. At that moment, Barrett came running up the deck, sword still in hand and breath ragged. Captain, 7 pirate vessels are bearing down on our starboard side. 2 ships fly the kingdom's flag, and a squadron of armed merchants is trailing them. Charles nodded, already calculating their next move. All right, battle stations, everyone. We've just signed up for another round. With that, the crew snapped into action, the hush of preparation replacing the tension of the moment, and the promise of a new fight crackling in the salt-tinged air. Charles surveyed the scene as Barrett finished his report. Except for one pirate ship that slipped away, we destroyed them all. We've recovered every bit of the auction funds, 19 billion Baileys in cash, plus a mountain of cargo. Barrett's words hung in the air. 19 billion. Charles's heart raced. Between the 19 million he'd just spent on supplies and the staggering haul now at their disposal, there was more than enough to cover everyone's pay this month, and then some. He nodded. All right, get a full accounting and hand the ledgers over to Elena. As for the extra stores, load everything we'll need onto the ship. Whatever remains, sell on the next island. And don't forget to preserve those pirate heads. We'll turn them in for bounties as soon as we reach the Navy outpost. Charles issued his orders with brisk efficiency. The routine was second nature by now. Understood, sir. Barrett saluted and stepped aside. Charles turned to the young deckhands who'd been listening. Enough standing around. Go wash up before, or your mothers start worrying. At his command, the boys cheered and hurried off, eager to escape the midday heat and the long hours ahead. Charles watched them go, already planning the next steps of their voyage. Chapter 316, Moria. The battle in these waters had finally drawn to a close, and the patrol ships of the 5 great houses in Shihai raced to report the outcome. You won't believe it, crackled one transmission. Charles Rockefeller never even showed himself. He let his children take on the entire fight. Most of them are under 10 years old. A stunned silence fell over the council chamber as the family heads exchanged incredulous looks. It's true, their chief intelligence officer confirmed. The Rockefeller heir transformed into a colossal dragon and incinerated an enemy warship with a single blast of flame. And their eldest daughter? She froze the sea solid with a single breath. Lord Furdo rose from his seat, waving off any further objections. From this day forward, do not cross the Rockefellers. We must cultivate their friendship. If Charles Rockefeller ever seeks assistance in Shihai, each of our houses is to respond at once. Make that clear to every responsible officer." With that proclamation, Charles's position in the West Sea was effectively secured. As long as he maintained the loyalty of his contacts on the islands, nothing would stand in the way of his plans. The battle had ended. The Rockefeller pirates slipped away, moving on to the next zone, leaving behind only a single ship with its few surviving crew. On its deck, Moriah tossed aside his oversized blade and slumped down, staring out at the endless swell of the open sea. "So where to now?" he muttered, weariness and frustration etched on his face. All around, the ocean stretched without end. The fresh recruits they'd taken in only a month before were all dead, slaughtered in skirmishes or claimed by the sea. Their captain had fallen to that dragon man's fury. The lieutenants had been poisoned by the little ghost's noxious gas. Now, only this battered vessel remained afloat. A grizzled sailor stepped forward. "Brother Moriah, it's your strength that saved us time and again. Why not take the helm? Lead us on." Moriah raised an eyebrow. "Me, Captain?" Another crewman climbed onto a barrel, voice resolute. "Who else is there? In these waters, we need a captain who can actually protect us. Promise, Moriah. Be our captain." A chorus of agreement rose from the deck. Moriah exhaled, the corners of his mouth twitching into a weary smile. He stood, met their hopeful gazes, and nodded. "Very well," he said. "I'll be your captain." With that vow hanging in the sea air, the little ship caught the wind and set its course into unknown waters once more. "Brother Charles, if you hadn't saved us, we'd never have survived. We're a ragtag band with nowhere to go. Only you can lead us through this," called an older sailor, his voice wavering with relief. Heads all around him bobbed in agreement. They remembered how Charles, with nothing but courage and quick thinking, had guided them off the battlefield just hours before. The praise left Charles momentarily speechless, but when the murmurs finally died down, he found his voice. "Since you all recommend me as captain, I won't refuse," he said, meeting their hopeful gazes. "From now on, as long as there's food in my hands, no one under my command will go hungry." At his words, around 30 to 40 of the crew burst into cheers, while a dozen of the older pirates offered respectful bows. On the deck, in total more than 60 survivors who'd cheated death raised their voices in celebration. "Long live Captain Charles!" they roared in unison. A wide grin split Charles's face. Gone was the hesitant boy who had lost everything. In his place stood a leader, taking his first decisive step toward a future all their own. Once the new captain was chosen, the crew brushed aside their lingering fears and set about preparing a grand feast in Captain Moria's honor. Just as laughter and music began to swell below decks, a shout rang out. "Captain Moria, come quick, look what I've found!" Everyone fell silent. A deckhand came racing out of the officers' quarters, clutching a small, ornate chest to his chest. Moria's tall frame Kyo ut through the crowd in an instant, and he peered down impatiently. "What is it?" The deckhand's eyes gleamed. "When I was cleaning the old captain's cabin, I discovered this devil fruit hidden away inside." A collective gasp rose from the assembled crew. They'd just been bested by a band of imps wielding devil fruit powers, and none of them had believed in those mystic fruits until now. The very word made their hearts pound. One by one, every pair of eyes locked onto the chest in Charles's hands, their expressions turning hungry with greed. Charles, formerly Charlotte, now firmly established as a boy, felt their stares prickling at his back. He glanced down at the carved wooden box, his excitement warring with a sudden unease. The devil fruit really existed, and now it was up for grabs. Charles's eyes darted across the ship's blood-slicked deck as he waited for Captain Moria's arrival. A harsh voice cut through the tension. "Boy, hand over the devil fruit!" Before anyone else could react, a desperate pirate lunged at Charles, slashing at the wooden chest with his knife. "What?" Charles gasped. The blade found its mark in Charles's back. He crumpled to the planks, pain blooming through him like wildfire, yet he refused to relinquish the chest. Blood pooled beneath him as he choked out a plea. "Captain, help me, quickly." Moria, caught off guard by the sudden violence, froze for only an instant. Then fury exploded from him. "You bastard!" In one sweeping motion, the dread captain drew his massive cleaver. A single bone-crushing blow cleaved the traitor in two. Moria didn't pause. He spun and hacked at every would-be usurper, his presence so overwhelming that the entire deck quaked. Within moments, dozens lay dead or writhing in pain. When the last pirate fell silent, Moria tossed the bloodied cleaver aside and hurried to Charles's side. The boy lay pale but resolute, still clutching the treasure chest containing the coveted devil fruit. Moria knelt, concern flickering in his hollow eyes as he reached for Charles, and the precious box he had risked his life to protect. "Charles!" Moria's shout tore through the silent deck as he knelt beside his younger brother, Charles, who lay crumpled on the wood with a dagger protruding from his back. Just beyond them, the enemy slumped against the rail, still clutching the iron-bound chest that had cost so many lives. Heart-pounding, Moria pried it open. Inside, cushioned in velvet, rested a devil fruit of deepest black, its single wing-shaped ridge gleaming ominously, the very fruit his crew had died to protect. Without hesitation, Moria seized the fruit and bit into its flesh. Dark juice stained his lips. "Charles," he vowed, his voice cracking with grief and resolve, "I'll carry on your will. I'll live for both of us." Around him, the 40 or so surviving crewmates stood frozen in horror. For a heartbeat, nothing stirred. Then Charles's wound gushed scarlet. Moria paid it no heed. He rose to his full height and faced the calm expanse of the west blue, eyes bright with fierce ambition. "From this day forth," he proclaimed, voice echoing over the waves, "we are the Moria pirates." A stunned silence fell over the deck. Then one quick-thinking sailor broke it with a roar. "Long live Captain Moria! Long live the Moria pirates!" Cheers erupted as the others surged forward, clapping Moria on the back and raising fists to the sky. Moria clenched his hand around the devil fruit, determination hardening in his gaze. He ordered his crew to tend the wounded, secure the fallen, and set sail at dawn. With his brother's final wish burning in his heart, Captain Moria would carve a new legacy across the seas, no matter the cost. Despite the crushing sorrow in the air, Moria's lips curved into an unexpected grin. She cast a cold, calculating gaze over the assembled crowd, then let out a tinkling laugh. "Hee hee hee! Tonight the little ones have their feast," she proclaimed, her voice ringing through the hall. Chapter 317, Collecting Ships. The Rockefeller pirates had been cruising the West Sea for over 2 months now. In that time, we'd explored countless ports, studied the customs of 100 different islands, and witnessed scenery that would make any landlubber's jaw drop. We'd also been embroiled in skirmish after skirmish. Caesar and the others led a naval engagement almost every other day. I, Charles, deliberately stayed on the sidelines, letting them call the shots. Knowing how crucial sea combat would be in the coming age of discovery, I'd invested in a small fleet of cannon-armed sailing ships. These weren't just trophies. They were floating classrooms. If my crew hoped to survive the New World's dangers, they needed drill practice under fire, a lesson in seamanship they couldn't learn ashore. I even forbade them from leaning too heavily on the Poseidon, our ultimate trump card, so that they'd develop real skills instead of relying on magic or brute force alone. It's no secret, once the great navigation era truly begins, pirates will flood the oceans. If my young fighters aren't ready, I'll end up shouldering every threat myself. And I have bigger plans than fending off marauders single-handedly. I want the Rockefeller flag flying over territory, not just on our ships. By training them now, I aim to build a crew strong enough to claim new islands and secure my foothold in the New World. After all, every empire starts with a single ship, and I intend to collect an armada. Carter and the others have pulled back their defenses, concentrating their forces around Kamei Island to check the pirates' ambitions. Thanks to Charles's formidable reputation, the Rockefeller pirates have confined themselves to patrolling the open sea and avoided any direct clash, and the other major pirate crews have made no real headway, operating only outside Rockefeller waters. Meanwhile, remote Wano country, with its secluded, hard-to-reach terrain, poses little immediate threat. At worst, a handful of surviving samurai might dream of restoring their homeland, but nearly all were wiped out during Charles's stay in Wano. He personally beheaded the various regional daimyos, leaving only the usurper Kurotan Orochi in hiding. Even he will struggle to unite the scattered remnants of Wano's samurai, so for now the country remains secure. Still, Charles must ensure that Kozuki Oden knows nothing of Wano's true condition. If Odin were to learn the truth, it would invite serious complications. So when it comes to dealing with him, absolute discretion is essential. Once this trouble becomes known across the globe, the Whitebeard pirates won't just sit back and watch. Charles will find himself directly in their crosshairs. He isn't afraid of them, but stirring up a conflict that hurts both sides serves no one. Does it help the Golden Lion, Charles himself, or merely boost the Navy's standing at everyone else's expense? Charles firmly believes Whitebeard won't let matters spiral that far. Whether Whitebeard will seek vengeance for Kazuki Odin is another question. After all, Odin abandoned ship midway and left the Whitebeard pirates behind. Charles isn't even sure the pirate lord still considers Odin one of his own. Then again, knowing Whitebeard as he does, Charles reckons the old man will feel compelled to strike back at least once, but he won't sacrifice his own son to do it. Not Ace, and not for a man who walked away. Great challenges lie ahead, and Charles must be ready for anything. To survive the coming wars, he needs real strength behind him. That's why he's begun drilling his crew relentlessly, so they won't be wiped out when the world erupts. "Dad, it's taken care of," Caesar called, stepping back into the room with a relieved grin. Charles nodded but said nothing more. No words of praise, no idle compliments. After all, the pirates roaming the four seas today posed no real threat to Caesar and Esther. These scoundrels were nothing but low-level buccaneers, lacking both proper weapons and the knowledge to wield them. How could they hope to challenge two masters so versed in combat and so commanding? Were it not for his youth, his body still growing and his martial domination spirit yet to awaken, Charles would swear that Caesar and Esther already fought with the strength of lieutenant generals. From where he stood now, they might even measure up to a full general. Especially Caesar. With his phantom beast art known as the green dragon fruit, he could snap a lieutenant general's wrist without breaking a sweat. What's our next destination? Charles turned to the navigator. The navigator's eyes drifted over an invisible chart he carried in his mind. Up ahead lies the Flower Kingdom, the most powerful nation in the West Sea. But there's an obstacle. A massive iceberg blocks our path. We'll have to steer around it before we can enter the kingdom. An iceberg? Charles murmured, brow furrowed in surprise. Charles remembered the legends of the 8 Treasures Navy's centuries-old hoard, rumored to lie buried within a massive iceberg just beyond the Kingdom of Flowers. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that the treasure must be there. No detours. Set course straight for the iceberg, he ordered. The navigator frowned. Captain, you don't understand. Beyond that iceberg lies a labyrinth of hidden reefs and drifting flows. Ships that try to pass through almost always run aground. No one in the Western Sea dares risk it. Charles stared at the map, weighing the danger against the promise of untold riches. Is there any way for our ship to get through? It's almost impossible, the navigator admitted. Our vessel is too large. One wrong turn, and we'd smash into those unseen rocks. A moment of silence fell over the deck. Charles's heart pounded with excitement. The wealth of the 8 Treasures Navy was legendary, and to sail into that ice-laden passage would certainly earn him infamy among the pirate fleets. But infamy was better than inaction. He squared his shoulders. Very well. Ready the crew for careful navigation. We'll proceed, but at our own risk. With that, Charles turned to the navigator. Together, they began plotting a path through the treacherous maze of ice, determined to seize the treasure that had eluded explorers for centuries. The captain stood with his head bowed in thought. His officers lingered on deck in respectful silence, reluctant to interrupt him. At last, Caesar, scratching at his tousled hair, piped up. Why don't we send a few of the captured pirate vessels in small squadrons to scout ahead? We've seized so many ships by now. It makes sense to use them to find our way through the strait. His excited suggestion rippled across the deck, just as their own ship slid into the narrow channel. All eyes turned to Charles, the captain's eldest son and heir. Charles jerked his head up, realization dawning. How many ships do we actually have at our disposal? He demanded. Caesar hesitated, then shrugged. Father's orders were to seize only the treasure and spare the crews, so after each engagement we stripped the holds and set the pirates free, save for a few stubborn captains who refused to sail again. That leaves us with just 5 prize ships under our flag. Charles slapped a hand to his forehead, half in frustration, half in awe. Pirates robbing other pirates, a curious sort of hypocrisy, he thought. They were all cut from the same cloth, yet here they were, eager to sink one another's vessels. He sighed and squared his shoulders. "All right," he said. "Gather the 5 ships, load them with our best navigators and provisions. We move at first light." Charles's ruthless reputation in Beihai and Shihai had spread far and wide. After weeks of sailing, not a single allied pirate crew had joined his banner, and it was clear why. Still, Charles refused to dwell on it. He clapped his hands and issued his next orders. "In the meantime, gather every ship we have and prepare to sail into that iceberg." He allowed himself a momentary pause, only long enough to meet his officer's eyes, then continued, "Understood?" A chorus of voices rose in affirmation. Without hesitation, his lieutenants turned and set their crews into motion, each man and woman moving to fulfill the tasks Charles had laid out. Chapter 318, Baoyu Iceberg. Charles still had another option. He could slip into the Kingdom of Flowers himself and secure a safe route for Green Pepper to follow. Of course, the Flower Court would never cooperate, but Charles had other means at his disposal. His mind-reading was no mere parlor trick. Over the years, his intuitive gift had deepened, evolving from simple telepathy into full-blown soul-searching and memory diving, powers said to rival those of the legendary Three-Eyed Clan. In the past few seasons, Charles had honed this gift even further. Sit him down in perfect stillness and fix his gaze, and he could hear the heartbeat of all things, the soft pulse of a passing breeze, the distant murmur of a mountain stream, and, astonishingly, even the subtle rhythmic breathing of stones. For a moment, this awareness left him speechless. Yet true foresight, peering unerringly into the future, remained just out of reach. Whether by natural talent or some quirk of fate, Charles could never see things with that level of certainty. What he could do, however, was detect danger long before it arrived. That was the first of his powers to awaken, a premonitory instinct that warned him of threats and allowed him to steer clear of them. It wasn't prophecy, it was something altogether different, and it had kept him alive more than once. Charles narrowed his gaze through his Haki-enhanced vision, tracing the curvature of the sky from thousands of meters below. Beyond that, true outer space still felt tantalizingly out of reach, a challenge for another day. He wondered where the future Admiral Fujitora might be at this moment. The blind marine officer was as enigmatic as he was powerful. Charles had no doubt fresh counsel from him could prove invaluable. Another potential ally flickered through his thoughts, the notorious Red Earl. It was a long shot to win such a man over, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. Over the past few years, the pirate Parkrick Redfield, known across the Grand Line as Lonely Red, had forged a fearsome reputation in the New World. He had openly challenged titans like Whitebeard, Gol D Roger, and the Golden Lion Shiki, refusing to back down. A certified battle fiend, Redfield actively sought the strongest opponents he could find, simply for the thrill of the fight. Fortunately for Charles, his own strongholds lay far from that lawless sea. Still, Redfield's name rang out everywhere. Not long ago, the Red Earl had brazenly stormed Charles's fortress on Kame Island, shattering its defenses in a single strike. The assault was a crushing blow to Charles's pride, and whispers spread like wildfire throughout the New World. Rumor had it that Redfield was poised to claim one of the coveted seats among the 4 emperors. Dozens of pirate crews, eager to bolster their strength, had offered their allegiance under Redfield's flag. Yet, true to his moniker, the Lonely Red refused every proposal without a second thought. Charles smiled to himself. If anyone understood the power of standing alone, it was Parkrick Redfield, and Charles was determined to learn just how far that power could carry him. The Red Earl possessed a remarkable gift, telepathy, but he never used it to build a following. When a handful of ambitious pirates tried to attach themselves to his rising legend, he simply read their thoughts, dismissed them with a cool nod, and watched them slink away. By relying solely on his own name and reputation, he only fueled the envy of the petty cutthroats who dreamed of unseating the 4 emperors themselves. Rumors swirled that the world government, or even the Marines, might be secretly behind the Red Earl's meteoric rise. After all, the Navy often meddled in affairs like this. But among low-level brigands and hardened sea rogues alike, his name was spoken in the same breath as the mighty emperor's. Yet even the Red Earl's growing infamy paled beside the bounty on Charles Lingling. As a high-ranking member of the Big Mom pirates, a family-run crew bound by blood and impossible for outsiders to infiltrate, Charles's legend cast an even longer shadow. There was no easy path to power in the Big Mom ranks, which made Charles's status all the more impressive. By comparison, the Red Earl's more open approach to recruitment had allowed him to climb just as swiftly, but with far less friction. For more than 2 weeks, every pirate in the West Blue had been talking about the same unstoppable force, the Rockefeller Pirates. The moment they crossed into these waters, they launched a merciless campaign, wiping out 6 or even 7 of the region's most notorious pirate bands. Now every fleet and flotilla waited with bated breath, asking the same question. What exactly did the Rockefeller pirates hope to achieve? Charles peered over the rail of the sea god Poseidon, astonished by the silence of the western seas. Ever since word spread that his crew had turned the shipping lanes into a free-for-all, plundering every vessel in sight, naval patrol boats included, the waters around the Rockefeller pirates had fallen eerily quiet. All day long, Caesar and his fellow raiders had patrolled the horizon without spotting a single target. Frustrated, they had fallen back to their flagship, hoping for news or action. Then the report came in. More than 60 ships have been seized. Are there really that many in the West Sea? Charles's heart skipped. 60 prizes? He hurried out onto the deck and froze. Arrayed in perfect formation around the Poseidon were well over 60 captured vessels, their hulls gleaming in the afternoon sun as if awaiting inspection. He sucked in a breath. If the Navy sees this, they'll think I'm building an armada. His eyes darted among the captured fleet and came to rest on 3 or maybe 4 fully armed warships flying the Navy's colors. His jaw dropped. You even robbed the Navy? He exclaimed. A wide grin spread across Caesar's face. He puffed out his chest, beaming at Charles, clearly pleased to have outdone even the royal fleet. He straightened his coat and waited for his captain's praise. Charles forced a laugh. He caught sight of Caesar standing by the rail, but said nothing more. All right, he called, waving his arm. We're heading straight for the iceberg. Without another word, Charles climbed into the cabin. Caesar hadn't done anything wrong. He'd simply mustered the ships under orders, and their fleet creaked onward under full sail. Thankfully, they'd seen no other traffic. Otherwise, the sight of so many vessels would surely have caused alarm. At last, Poseidon himself appeared at the edge of the ice field. The sea god gazed out over the frozen expanse, letting out a sharp hiss. Brr! This chill cuts right through you. Several of the crew, young, impish types who joked they were little devils, clutched at each other, trembling. Just then, Trunks sprang to his feet. He activated his heat fruit power, and in an instant, the air around them warmed, melting the edge of frost on the deck. Estes joined Trunks, their combined abilities keeping everyone comfortable. After all, maintaining warmth in winter, or a bit of cool air in summer, was no trifling matter at sea. In Charles's gloved hand rested another treasure, the temperature fruit artifact, its surface humming with power. Charles cleared his throat. All right, send a few boats ahead, one at a time. Row close to those ice shelves and test the waters. At his command, the crew hurried to man the small boats. Oars dipped into the dark sea as the first boat pulled away, cutting cautiously through the icy floes. Charles stood on deck, heart steady. He wasn't one to panic, but these hidden reefs and shifting sheets of ice were treacherous. Every man and woman aboard knew they'd have to be at their sharpest if they were to survive this frozen frontier. Charles had studied the Titanic disaster, and he knew exactly how it ended. A mighty ship undone by a simple iceberg. He had poured every ounce of sweat and ingenuity into his own vessel, the sea god Poseidon, and there was no way he was going to let it break apart on these frozen seas. One rescue ship aft or another had ventured into the ice fields, each racing to reach the dozens of stricken vessels caught in the drift. Only specially trained search and rescue teams dared disembark on the treacherous glacier itself. At last, relief crackled through the radio. Captain, this is the Aurora. We've made landfall on the ice and located a safe corridor. The navigator burst onto the bridge, excitement lighting his eyes. "We should move immediately, Captain. Barrett, stay aboard the Poseidon and send me an instant report if anything changes." Charles gave a curt nod. He boarded the launch with a small team of trusted crew and steered toward the towering glacier ahead. The wind bit at their faces, but Charles kept his gaze fixed on the vast white plain. When the skiff ground to a halt, he stepped onto the gleaming ice and confirmed it matched every landmark on their satellite charts. Striding to the heart of the field, he raised his boot and swept away a pile of powdery snow. All fell silent as the drifts tumbled aside, revealing the smooth, translucent surface beneath. Then, through the crystalline ice, something caught everyone's breath, a pale, metallic glimmer half buried in the frozen sheet. A child's voice rang out, trembling with shock and hope. "Dad? There's something moving beneath the ice," Caesar whispered, leaning closer to the frozen surface. Charles rolled his eyes. "I'm not blind." Caesar. Chapter 319. Charles felt a bone-deep chill crawl through his fingertips as he gripped the seven-star sword. He pressed the blade's tip lightly against the thick ice before him, yet, to the astonishment of everyone watching, it barely scored the surface, producing only a faint chip. Gasps spread through the courtyard. They all knew how razor-sharp a demon's sword could be. This very blade stood shoulder to shoulder with the famed 12 Great Supreme Broadblade, yet here it was, utterly thwarted by a solid sheet of ice. Impulsively, one of the warriors drew the long knife from his waist and swung it with every ounce of strength he possessed. Clang! The edge cut only a hairline groove, and the man's arm quivered from the recoil. "What on earth is this ice? It's harder than steel!" Estes cried, her voice echoing off the frost-glazed walls. No one had any answer. This freezing block of ice defied every record and legend they knew. Charles stepped forward calmly and announced, "It's the Baoyu iceberg." Silence fell. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, someone in the back blurted, "Baoyu iceberg." A heartbeat later, another voice broke through, trembling with awe. "Dad!" Every pair of eyes swung toward Charles, their expressions a mixture of shock and something like reverence. Whatever this Baoyu iceberg was, it clearly carried a legacy, and Charles, it seemed, was its key. Charles crouched over the frozen ground, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What do you think is buried under here?" Caesar asked, peering at the thick sheet of ice. Charles glanced back at him and the rest of the crew. "Directly beneath our feet lies a massive treasure hoard. Legend says it's been buried by the 8 Treasures Navy for centuries, and I intend to take every last bit of it." He met their surprised looks with a grin. "Once we break this ice, they'll see why." He tapped a spot on the ground. That 8 Treasures Navy unit was Vice Admiral Garp's pride and joy, nicknamed the Green Pepper Squadron after Garp himself. They were captured by him 2 years ago. I actually remember meeting them when I was a kid. Caesar's eyes widened. "You did meet them, but you were barely 3 years old. Estes can confirm." Estes gave a small, wry smile. "True, under Garp's imposing presence, I discovered my own ambition. In a strange way, he's still a benefactor of mine." Most of the crew exchanged blank looks. 7 years is a long time, and Caesar had only been a toddler then. Charles clapped his gloved hands once. "Enough nostalgia. Caesar, your mother's waiting for us back on the ship. Everyone else, stand clear. If my calculations are right, this ice is about to shatter." With that, Charles raised his custom drill cannon, aimed it at the frozen ground, and prepared to blast open the centuries-old seal. Everyone froze at his words. They hurried back to the deck and formed a tight circle around the ship, eyes fixed on Charles's every move. Beneath his boots was a massive slab of ice, studded with glittering gemstones and precious ores, treasures that, until now, had lain untouched. All of it would be his. As for the purse of gold coins, those very coins had once bought Charles's life 7 years ago. He would not refuse them today. After all, if he did, they could always come begging to him. Charles raised his 7-star sword, and the blade flared with an eerie green light. Lightning arced along its length, filling the air with a crackling energy. The instant the sword glowed, a palpable, tyrannical aura bloomed around him like a storm cloud. The crew held its breath, utterly entranced. It was almost unheard of to see Charles strike first. He was normally content to stand back and let others take the initiative. The last time he had gone on the offensive was 2 years ago, when he dueled Admiral Zepha of the Black Armor for nearly a week straight. Now, witnessing him prepare to move again, even the most hardened sailors felt their pulses quicken. Especially the new recruits, who gaped at every detail, wide-eyed and awestruck by their captain's den display of power. Charles lifted his right arm, the ancient 7-star sword blazing in the pale light. Drawing a deep breath, he intoned the blade's true name in a low, fierce tone. Demon Sword of the 7 Skies. In that instant, raw energy coursed through the steel, outward from Charles's hand in a searing arc. With every ounce of his strength, he thrust the sword downward into the glacier below. Boom! A thunderous crack split the ice as sword chi cleaved through meters of jade-white crystal. Shockwaves rippled outward, shaking the entire island. Snow and ice shards exploded into the air, blinding anyone who stood too close. Charles staggered under the aftershock, heart pounding. He'd unleashed nearly his full power, power enough to shatter an island. Could this legendary jade ice really hold up to such a blow? As the tremors subsided, a fine cascade of snowflakes danced across the fractured surface. Far off, aboard the warship Poseidon, Commander Barrett snapped his spyglass into focus. A deep boom still lingered in the air. "What was that?" he murmured, lowering the glass. "Has the captain finally chosen to act?" Everyone aboard knew only their captain wielded such overwhelming force, yet no answer came. Only the drifting snow and a tense hush marked the gulf between the distant observers and the island's frozen heart. Back at the center of the glacier, the swirling snowflakes began to settle, slowly revealing a network of jagged cracks. Whatever lay hidden beneath that ice, and whatever fate awaited those who dared stand upon it, remained cloaked in winter's hush. Charles stepped onto the shattered ice and peered down at the glittering hoard beneath his boots. "This ice is tougher than I expected," he muttered. "Everybody, haul these treasures up onto the ship," he ordered, swiveling to face the crew crowded behind him. For a moment, the sailors gaped at Charles's sudden command. Then the veteran quartermaster barked an order, and the men surged forward. "Captain, we're rich," someone cried. They walked gingerly across piles of gold coins that tinkled underfoot, eyes wide in disbelief. Spanning nearly 100 meters in every direction, the broken ice had revealed a trove of unimaginable wealth. Stacks of gold, crates of jewels, and ornate relics. None of them had ever seen so much treasure in one place. "Laugh all you like. This is ours now!" Charles shouted over the clamor, his voice ringing across the deck. "Keep loading." The men redoubled their efforts, filling barrels and chests with gold that amounted to tens of billions in value. All of it hailed from the mighty Kingdom of Flowers, the most powerful realm in the Western Sea, and now, by Charles's reckoning, it was theirs for the taking. Charles stared in awe at the mountain of loot before him, tens of billions in treasure, carefully amassed and passed down through generations by a single commander. It was, without question, the largest haul of his career. Only the fabled golden city of Sky Island, its icebergs, said to be paved in pure gold, had ever rivaled such wealth. He longed to see that legendary realm for himself, though he knew his time would come soon enough. All around him, crewmen darted forward, heaving handfuls of ingots into their arms and racing back to the ship under the weight of their haul. Even the youngest deckhands gathered gold with unbridled excitement, aware that each bar was worth a small fortune. Amid the glittering piles, 3 ornately carved chests caught Charles's eye. He didn't need to guess their contents. Devil fruits bequeathed by the storied 8 Treasures Navy were nothing less than priceless relics. Heart-pounding, Charles knelt beside the nearest box and lifted its lid. Inside, nestled in straw, lay a single devil fruit, its strange, rippling surface promising power beyond imagining. Tucked beneath it was a folded sheet of parchment. With trembling fingers, Charles picked up the paper and unfolded it, eager to learn what secrets it might hold. A natural-type mercury fruit, a genuine natural devil fruit. Ez's heart leapt as he cradled the silver-white fruit in his hand. A true natural devil fruit had never appeared in the original tale, yet here it was, secretly held by the 8 Treasures Navy. Chapter 320, 3 Top Devil Fruits. Charles's heart pounded as he swung open the first chest to reveal a gleaming, quicksilver fruit. Its silvery sheen danced under the torchlight, a rare natural-type devil fruit, and unquestionably precious. Without pausing, he carefully stowed it away, eager to see what lay in the remaining 2 chests. He lifted the second box and pried it open. Inside lay a bizarre fruit shaped like a banana, its skin a swirling tapestry of purple and crimson. The patterns twisted and shimmered hypnotically, as though alive. Tucked beside it was a brittle scroll. Charles unrolled the yellowed paper and read the faded ink aloud. Superhuman phantom fruit grants the power to conjure illusions. A grin spread across his face. Another top-tier devil fruit, he murmured, marveling at its potential. Illusion powers could be devastating in the right hands, and now it would be his to master. Gently, he placed the phantom fruit among his spoils. His pulse quickened as he turned to the third and final chest. With a single pull, its lid fell away to disclose yet another banana-shaped fruit, this one cloaked in a drab khaki hue. It exuded a weighty aura, as though bearing some grave power. Charles reached forward, curiosity and anticipation warring in his chest. 3 devil fruits, each supremely rare. What trials and triumphs awaited him once he unlocked their hidden gifts. Charles stared at the fruit in awe. Its skin was scored by deep claw-like slashes, the jagged grooves weaving together in a pattern that pulsed with raw strength. The fruit's curved shape even resembled a beast's powerful foreleg. Beside it lay a small note. Animal class phantom beast, Kirin fruit, grants mastery over earth and elemental forces. A truly extraordinary devil fruit. Clutching the hefty banana-shaped fruit, Charles could barely contain his excitement. In a single haul, he'd unearthed 3 devil fruits, one each from the nature, superhuman, and animal categories. The fabled 8-treasure navy certainly lived up to its name. No wonder this centuries-old faction was so formidable. Finding 3 top-tier devil fruits made him happier than amassing billions in treasure. He threw his head back and let out a roaring laugh that reverberated across the ice fields, sending nearby bergs trembling. Ha! Caesar heard his son's triumphant cry and hurried over. Charles, what have you got there? Grinning, Charles held the Kirin fruit aloft. Caesar's eyes widened in astonishment. A devil fruit! And not just any devil fruit, the Kirin fruit, with the power to command earth and elements, Charles replied, practically vibrating with excitement. Caesar whistled softly. Incredible. This will change everything. Seems the 8-treasures navy still has devil fruits hidden away. Caesar blurted out, staring in amazement at the strange, swirling pattern on the fruit in Charles's hand. By now, it had to be the 3rd time today he'd been taken aback. Charles chuckled as he slipped all 3 devil fruits into his satchel. You bet, 3 of them, to be exact. Without waiting for another word, he shouldered a treasure chest and strode across the frozen cavern toward his ship, the sea god Poseidon. Caesar opened his mouth to argue, but found himself tongue-tied. After a long moment, he shrugged and turned back to sorting the rest of the haul alongside his siblings. Even with tens of billions in gold, piles of jewels, and a trove of fragile antiques, loading everything aboard would take hours, and he still couldn't fathom why a pirate cared so much about dusty old relics. On deck, Barrett exhaled in relief when he saw Charles emerge from the iceberg's maw. "Captain, what on earth happened down there?" he called, eyes wide. Charles flashed a grin, clearly in high spirits. "You'll see soon enough," he replied, setting the chest down with a satisfied thud. Charles stood at the prow of the ship, his sword raised high. A brilliant arc of steel cut clean through the jade-green iceberg, splitting the ice with a single precise stroke. The enormous block of ice cracked open, revealing heaps of gold coins, glittering gemstones, and priceless artifacts buried within. With a satisfied smile, Charles called over his first mate. "Barrett, get more hands down here and start hauling this treasure aboard. Bring as many people as you can. Let's not waste a moment." Barrett nodded briskly. "Aye, Captain. I'll organize the crew right away." He strode off without a second glance. Treasure was nothing new to him. He'd seen hoards like this before. What really caught his eye, though, were the 3 small chests Charles clutched in his other hand. Barrett knew at once that they contained devil fruits, rare, coveted prizes that could grant unimaginable powers. No wonder the captain was so pleased. Once the orders were given, Charles retreated to his cabin to inspect and savor his freshly acquired prize. Meanwhile, Barrett gathered a dozen deckhands, loaded them into the longboat, and began rowing back toward the floating ice floe. Back on deck, Charles leaned against the rail, surveying the sea with the relaxed authority of a god of the waves. No one dared question him as he lounged in the warm sunshine, already tasting the thrill of his newest devil fruit. By the time Barrett's party arrived at the iceberg, the crack was wide and clear. But even Barrett, with all his experience, drew in a sharp breath. Beneath the fractured ice lay more treasure than he'd ever imagined. Towers of gold doubloons, strings of jewels, and scattered chests waiting to be opened. The sight was dazzling, and for a moment, every man was lost in wonder. Barrett shook himself out of his stupor. "All right, lads," he called, "let's get to work." And with that, the crew set to hauling the bounty aboard, while the sea around them glittered under the afternoon sun, rich, dangerous, and full of promise. A broad swath of gold lay scattered across the glacier, its dazzling light glinting in the afternoon sun. "So this is the treasure the captain mentioned," Barrett muttered under his breath. At first, he doubted Charles's story, but the moment he saw all that gold, any hesitation vanished. He dove in alongside the rest of the crew. Since Charles had announced a world voyage, Steward Ivan had remained behind on Kamai Island. Elena managed the ship's accounts, while Barrett, newly promoted from warrior to quartermaster, was responsible for dividing the haul, a task that plagued him every month. Confronted by the sheer volume of coins and ingots, Barrett couldn't help but grin at his good fortune. All day, the Poseidon ferried men back and forth between the shattered iceberg and the ship's deck. By evening, they had combed every crevice, ensuring not a single gold piece remained. Satisfied, the crew returned to the main vessel, leaving only the ruined ice formation behind. Remarkably, although Charles had cracked the famed Baoyu iceberg, its structure could still be mended once the fissures were packed with green peppers. Recovering that jade iceberg would take decades, perhaps even centuries. Charles's shot had shattered it beyond repair. Back aboard the Poseidon, the crew hauled the last chests of gold onto the deck. A roar of excitement swept through the air. "Riches! Fortune!" they hollered. Charles stepped forward, a broad grin on his face. "To celebrate our haul, tonight, every man and woman aboard will receive 100 million Baileys." He swept his hand across the cheering throng. Thousands of voices rose in unison. "Long live the captain! Long live the captain!" Barrett joined the cheer for a moment, though his smile faltered. Now he would have to share the wealth. Still, he lifted his fist and bellowed, "Let the banquet begin." Under the starlit sky, the Poseidon's deck glowed with lanterns. In the galley, more than 50 cooks hustled to prepare the feast. When a maid caught sight of Charles descending the stairs, she hurried forward with a grateful curtsy. Without such a large kitchen staff, feeding this many people would have been an impossible task. High spirits carried the night as music began, and plates heaped with savory dishes circulated among the crew. On the waves, the Poseidon celebrated her captain and their hard-won treasure into the early hours. The chefs didn't just serve sumptuous dishes, singers and dancers kept everyone entertained, filling the banquet with laughter and delight. The party raged on the deck until just before dawn, only winding down when the first pale light of morning crept over the horizon. By then Charles was utterly dazed. A trio of blushing attendants gently but firmly carried him back to his cabin. What happened next, of course, needs no further explanation.